I've come to tell you what I see. There are great darknesses.
You kill me, bitch. That's the joke of all time.
Keep away from the windows. Somebody might blow you a kiss.
Silencio. Silencio.
Don't you like the taste of blood?
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale.
I shall now count from 1 to 10.
We're gonna get done, dude!
He hates these cans! Because he's here!
Yet this kind of censorship seems almost inevitable considering the flow of blood and guts films which has glutted the marketplace in recent years. While it is possible to argue the artistic merit of films such as Psycho and The Exorcist, a new breed of shriek merchants has exploited the once honorable genre of the terror film. Most followers of this genre point to a 1978 film called Halloween as the vehicle which opened the bloody floodgates at the box office.
Welcome to the Church of Cinematic Oblivion. I'm Nick.
And I'm Harry, and today we are concluding our History of Slashers series with Slashers Part 3, an American genre.
1979 to 1989. We made it. I don't know what to say, man. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, well, this is going to total about 5 hours or so of listening.
More than that.
About 4 months of research and movie watching.
We've watched lifetime of research.
But we've watched close to 30 movies? No,
yes.
More than that. Maybe 40 movies that we've talked about in this whole series.
Yeah, I'd say more even. And we actually genuinely set off to watch every American slasher film.
Right. We found that was actually an impossible task.
Absolutely impossible. As I've said before, Oblivion is a lifelong pursuit. But let's not waste a lot of time. Let's get to it. What do you say? But first, I make a few quick corrections.
Yeah, the number one is that we forgot to talk about a movie called Rituals when we were doing our Hicksploitation segment in the last episode.
Right.
From 1977, it was a Deliverance knockoff that had some slasher elements in that it had a mystery killer killing them one by one. Honestly, not a lot to say about it, though. Neither of us really like it.
It's one of Stephen King's favorites.
Well, Stephen King has bad taste.
Whoa. Yeah. But anyway.
He loves TV movies.
He's equal opportunity. Actually, Stephen King's novel Danse Macabre is a great overview of horror history. The one other thing is I sounded like a smartass and I was actually a dumbass because I said Lepidopterian. And
you're so confident
and Harry,
with that one.
Harry was like, I can't believe you know that word. Got it wrong. Lepidopteran would be correct for a butterfly specialist. The only reason I knew that was because Vladimir Nabokov, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah. So we're going to start off by just establishing where we are in the chronology of things.
Yes. I just want to introduce this chapter by saying we've talked a lot about film history, but we've dabbled and touched, but we haven't really gone into history at the time that these films were coming out.
Slashers came at an important time in history, and they had a really big cultural impact, so we should at least just set the ground for where we were in America when slashers got popular and why they got popular when they did.
So, Chapter 1. What's your damage?
What is your damage, Heather?
Anyway, he goes, are you into S&M? I go, oh, right. Could you, just picture me in a leather teddy? Yeah, right. Hurt me. I'm sure, no way.
Illegal cocaine is coming into our country at alarming levels, and 4 to 5 million people regularly use it.
Sure, Sir Isaac Newton unraveled the mysteries of gravity, but could he have unraveled the mysteries of Rubik's Cube?
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
Okay, so we touched on this in our chapter on the Madonna in the last episode, the 70s was the height of second wave feminism. First wave feminism, of course, being just like basic shit like the right to vote. And second wave feminism being this new idea of women finding an equal place in the workplace and in society and bodily autonomy and, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Black Christmas touches on stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. That was the early 70s. Then in the late 70s, early 80s, conservatism kind of rises again.
We've talked about this before, about nostalgia and how nostalgia has these crazes. When you look at the 80s, you have this compounded nostalgia of the 80s being nostalgic for the 50s.
Mm-hmm. And 50s, not just in the way of like white picket fence and home values, but very much in a way of nationalism and, you know, strong conservative economics.
And racism in the sense of having this like perfect white suburbia separated from these dark menaces, you know?
Yeah.
Which manifests in a lot of different ways. It can be racist, it can be homophobic, we'll get into that. It could also be just kind of fear of the urban in contrast to the suburban or the rural. And also fear of the rural, as we'll discuss. But another thing to keep in mind is that the 50s was the invention of this idea known as the teenager. I know we take teenagers for granted now, but in the 50s, teenagers emerged as an identity, somewhere between childhood and adulthood. And so since the 80s is a nostalgia for the 50s, there's a renewed interest in the identity of the teenager.
And we get that so much in that 80s teen comedy is its own. At the video store I work, 80s teen comedy is a section. 80s movies were very focused on teenagers and teenage life, and 80s horror movies found their new focus in teenagers, which is one of the huge defining pillars of the slasher film.
Right. I mean, not to get too deep into all this, but in the 50s, the teenagers emerged strongly as an identity in doo-wop music, greasers, films like
Archie comics.
Yeah, right. And in the 60s and the 70s, I would say that the teenage identity blended a bit with young adult identity, with the hippies and like, speed freaks and disco, hounds of those eras. And then in the 80s, the teenager becomes more defined again, and so we get all these films about high school and early college.
You get more mileage from a cheap pair of sneakers. Next phase, new wave, dance crazy. Anyways, it's still rock and roll to me.
Yeah. So it's also important, I think, to note that a lot of people had come back from Vietnam, and this was the first war that we kind of started to, in the mainstream, acknowledge as like not a good war.
This was one of the first wars where it was like unpopular at home.
Right. We were also just into the new era of assassination becoming a really big landmark of public society.
Assassination and serial killers.
We talked about how the original Michael Myers sequence in the first in Halloween is the same year as Kennedy's assassination. So there's we were sort of joking, but there is that argument to be made that in the 60s there's a documentary, The Killing of America.
The Killing of America, where it argues that the assassination of Kennedy is when America became a nation built on random people murdering each other.
Right. With these conservative values, we get a lot of panics and paranoia crazes. There's the satanic panic, where just everyday people get convinced that their neighbors are parts of satanic cults.
Which went hand in hand with the renewed panic of pedophilia and child molestation, specifically
Stranger
thinking
danger.
that gay men were going to kidnap your children.
Right. There was the war on drugs, of course, which started to demonize average Americans,
and which was also a suburban white people raging a war against urban minorities.
Right, of course, because people in the suburbs were using drugs, particularly prescription drugs, a lot, and yet vilifying urban drug use. In a similar way, capitalism found a new vogue with Reaganomics, and Reagan shut down a lot of mental health facilities, and the kind of homeless people we're used to today kind of came into existence in the Reagan era. The idea that unmedicated, schizophrenic, and psychotic people would just be wandering the streets untreated.
Which is the opening scene of Halloween.
Right.
When he shows up the thing, there are the mental patients wandering around
and
outside.
That movie was before Reagan. So in suburbia, the Reagan people, the conservative Americans, and even the moderate liberals start to come out against these films and call them glorifying of violence.
Well, let's talk about in the early 80s, 1980 specifically, when slasher movies became very mainstream popular and how people felt about them at the time.
Yeah, they were popular because Halloween was a hit, and then a little after that, Friday the 13th, which we'll get to in a second, was a huge hit.
Right. So 1980, especially with young people and minorities, slasher movies were very, very popular.
Yeah. In fact, a woman said that a woman on this show, Coast to Coast, which was a news show at the time, she's actually pretty fair and impartial, but she talked specifically about how slasher movies got a reputation for being popular among racial minorities.
Among specifically Black and Latino young people.
Yeah, and she said,
Why do horror films appeal to minority groups? Well, Lustig says it's because the movies rely heavily on visual impact, and therefore language is not a problem. But many parents and civic groups see these films in a more sinister light, calling them the new pornography.
So slasher movies, also, by the way, this is rap music is just getting started. Now, it's rap music that you'd barely identify as what we now call
and
rap.
rap music was really positive at that time.
Well, not all of it. A lot of it was about... it was really slow is what it was. And it was very Mother Goosey. But a lot of it was like, my life isn't easy. I have a hard life. Sometimes I've seen people get murdered. And it wasn't even much better than that. And people, and suburban Reaganites would be like, oh! Yeah. And it was the same as slasher films.
So there's a lot of the old generation being upset at the youth. But there's also, within slashers, you get... It's unclear if it's a criticism or a reinforcement of those values in the idea of your idyllic suburban home being invaded by mayhem and murder.
Right. And Stephen King was in vogue, and he was doing the same kind of stories, Norman Rockwell America invaded by horror.
Yeah, and it's unclear, to me at least, if they're criticizing the old-timey conservatives by saying, hey, your suburbs aren't any safer than urbanity, or if they're, like, agreeing with them saying, look at this perfect world and look at how you have to ruin it.
Right. Yeah, good question. It doesn't matter, because we can interpret it however we want. Here at Cinematic Oblivion, we are strong believers that what the author intended is interesting, but not the end-all, be-all,
And when it comes to slasher movies, they get misinterpreted, in our opinions, misinterpreted quite often.
And as we'll get into, especially in Chapter 4, in which we will exhaustively go through as many slashers as we can, as quickly as we can, without skipping good details, the good slashers and the great slashers, they get the kind of right metaphor and the right sort of psychoanalytic message that we discussed in the last episode.
Right, which is what makes them interesting.
Right, and the bad slashers just ape on what seems to succeed about these other better movies, and they often miss the point entirely.
Yeah. And it wasn't just older, more conservative parent types who weren't happy with slasher movies. A lot of young progressive liberals weren't happy with them. They thought they were exploitative. A lot of feminists were very unhappy with slasher movies.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag. The other thing to remember is that before we get into the film, which we'll discuss in Chapter 2, which I already mentioned, there were two films in 1980, and also I think one of them might be in 79, Cruising and Windows, which were both about killers from the gay community. Specifically Cruising. Did I say Cruising?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
By William Friedkin.
Right, was interpreted by many. I actually see it as fairly ahead of its time, but it was interpreted by many as an incredibly homophobic film.
Well, it's been looked at both ways, because it was controversial for showing so much gay sex and gay lifestyle, but it was also controversial by gay men who thought it was exploitative.
Well, you know what, though? What it really is about, not really to spoil it too much, but it's about a self-hating gay man who murders other gay men.
Closeted homophobia.
A closeted gay man who serial murders other gay men, Jeffrey Dahmer
because
style.
He sees himself in them.
Right, and also a lot like what happened at Pulse nightclub. I mean, this is a real deal. So, which is why I can see movies as being like a good social commentary.
Yeah.
But I think the slasher movie was invented with Black Christmas, was solidified and popularized with Halloween, and then we kind of saw it spill into complete over-franchisement with the next movie we will talk about.
Yeah, and so 1980 is when the slasher really hits the scene and becomes mainstream American culture.
Right, so that's the brief historical context. I would love a historian to check in with us, get in touch with us, and say what their theories are on why the slasher was interesting and important at the time it came out. Before we move into Chapter 2, I just want to briefly do a trope check from the last episode. We've gone over a lot of this. We're going to be talking about movies that don't fit these tropes perfectly, but in our opinion, the best slashers fit the following tropes. First of all, they're from the victim's perspective.
So we immediately rule out movies where the killer is the protagonist.
Right. Now, there are movies we're going to discuss as slashers where you know who the killer is from the beginning. Even in the original, popular
in
slasher.
Halloween.
In Halloween,
you know who the killer is
from the beginning.
So you don't need the mystery element.
But it's not from his perspective.
Yeah, Michael Myers can't be the protagonist of Halloween or else it isn't a slasher film.
So a lot of great films, which we'll disavow in Chapter 4, like, Silent Night, Deadly Night, and Maniac, are not slashers because they're about the development of a psycho slasher from their perspective.
Right, and it's interesting because Maniac was a movie that was incredibly controversial when it came out, and that many were labeled or looked at as the example of why these slasher movies are so dangerous, but it's not actually a slasher movie.
Yeah, Silent Night, Deadly Night, similarly, but we'll get into that in Chapter 4. Another part of these is that they're about American teenagers. We touched on that already.
And that they often have a final girl character or a last survivor. A couple others...
We talked about this in the Madonna theory. It's important. Not every slasher film has a final girl, and some of the best even don't, but when the metaphor works at its most perfect, there is a final girl.
Right. A lot of them are also reactions to past trauma. The murders are because of something that happened 10 years before, a couple years before.
Every slasher in the 80s started to try to get their own signature weaponry. After Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they went pretty simplistic with John Carpenter's Halloween and also Black Christmas. There's just kitchen knives, right?
Black Christmas, it's different. Every murder's done differently.
But then, you had signature ones going on. There was machetes, there was pitchforks, there was drills. These all became chief points of it. Oh, and we should also mention, we didn't mention yet, the Driller Killer in 79 does not count as a slasher.
No, because it's from his perspective.
Once again. But also more like cruising, like an urban slasher type movie.
Yeah, it's like a grindhouse exploitation movie.
And then you have always mentioned it's always cool in a slasher. It doesn't always happen, but it's always cool when the other victims don't know everyone's being killed. They're just like, oh, I guess everyone left.
Which is key in Black Christmas and Halloween. These are ones that aren't necessary, but they're cool. Is a lot of POV shots from the killer's perspective, stalking people. Creepy phone calls is a big one.
Good synthesizer soundtrack.
Yeah, good rising synth score.
Thanks to John Carpenter, who really kind of invented the need for the hardcore keyboard Casio sound.
And a psychomaniac killer. Not necessarily. Sometimes there will be a revenge aspect,
but usually like a little nutty revenge.
Yeah, like in Friday the 13th, you could say it's revenge, but it's actually
it's psychosis. Same with Night School. You could say it's revenge, but it's also insanity. You know? We'll get into that. And then the killer often presents their victims in a tableau fashion, very theatrically.
Right, which we also addressed last time, but that's a big one that keeps coming back.
That kind of relates to Texas Chainsaw. All right, we're going to move now out of the historical context and into the film analysis. Let's get to Chapter 2, A Long Night at Camp Blood.
So young. So pretty. Oh, what monster could have done this?
Bill's out there.
Oh, God, this place. Steve should never have opened this place again. There's been too much trouble here. Did you know that a young boy drowned the year before those two others were killed? The counselors weren't paying any attention. They were making love while that young boy drowned. His name was Jason. I was working the day that it happened, preparing meals. Here, I was the cook. Jason should have been watched every minute. He wasn't a very good swimmer. We can go now, dear.
So in 1980, a movie came out called Friday the 13th that I'm certain all of you have heard of, if not seen. And this movie was very successful at the time and kind of ushered in the popular slasher genre.
It was incredibly financially successful, but it's important to note that it was critically panned. Siskel, Gene Siskel of Siskel and Ebert, even hated the film so much that he spoiled the ending in his review and basically asked people to write letters to the producer and to the woman who played Miss Voorhees, telling them how much they hated the film.
Yeah, he's a piece of shit, and so is Roger Ebert. They
seriously.
You'll hear a clip from them.
90 minutes of teenagers being strangled, stabbed, impaled, chopped up, and mutilated. That's all this movie is. It's just mindless, bloody violence. And just think of the message this film offers to its teenage audience. The world is a totally evil place, this movie says. It'll kill you. It doesn't matter what your dreams and hopes and ambitions are. It doesn't matter if you have a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend or you've got plans for the future. You can forget those plans because you're going to wind up dead. There is literally nothing else in this movie. And the sickest thing is...
They really were the elitists of this bunch. But Friday the 13th, we talked in episode 1 about a little giallo known as A Bay of Blood.
Right, and this is kind of a visual remake of that film. It doesn't have the same plot points, but it has a lot of the same imagery and style.
Yeah, it has literally some of the same imagery in some of the murders, and the fact that it all takes place around a body of water, and there's a bunch of lurid sex, followed by gruesome, over-the-top death and violence.
And in Friday the 13th Part 2 actually has a lot more similar to Bay of Blood.
I think that's the best of the Friday series.
But we'll get to that in a second.
Right. So Friday the 13th, I think it's a good slasher.
It's definitely in the good category. It's a lot better than Bay of Blood. It just does suspense well.
Yeah.
Gialli don't understand how suspense works. They don't know how to build a tone and establish, like, tension.
Right.
Friday the 13th does, and it does it really well.
So Friday the 13th was made because of the success of Halloween. As soon as Halloween became a box office smash in 78, Friday the 13th and a bunch of other slashers went immediately into production through 79, and most of them were released in 80 and 81. So Friday the 13th was one of the first to make a big splash. It was directed by Sean S. Cunningham, who had worked with Wes Craven before on, I believe, Last House on the Left. And what's interesting about Friday the 13th is that it's very simplistic, but it totally works. It was originally supposed to be called A Long Night at Camp Blood, and it was just a basic story about people at a summer camp being killed. And it forever cemented this theme of the forest and specifically of summer camp as a setting for sexual awakening and therefore death in the, I don't know how you say it, the like failed self-actualization of teenage identities.
Well, this is a thing where it's kind of a second mover bias, where the first movie introduces a lot of these ideas, and then the second movie gets them right, but also exaggerates them.
Right.
So the first movie, we only have, well, in the opening scene, it's two kids sneak off to hook up in a cabin.
Right, and it's in like the 50s or the 60s.
The 60s.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And they get murdered. A lot of the driving force behind the teenagers' motivations is sex and getting laid.
Right. And right away when it starts, it's very similar to the opening of Halloween. Once again, it was kind of trying to copy what worked about Halloween. It is the 60s. It's the old school Americana being invaded, the Norman Rockwell America. I mean, we have a vision of a bunch of campers in old school Americana camp gear singing, I think, Kumbaya around a fire, and then two of them sneak off to hook up.
Yeah.
And literally, the title, Friday the 13th, smashes in and shatters the screen, you know, shattering all conventions of what you expected from this camp setting. I think this is the first camp slasher, you know? Sure, we'd seen some, like, horror in the woods, but, like, summer camp.
No, for kids going to summer camp. And also, kids going to summer camp, we should talk about, I mean, we all know what that means, but it is, like, somewhat of a rite of passage for young people. You go away to summer camp, you're away from your parents, you try new things, you're outside of your, like, urban or suburban setting, you're with new people, and a lot of people have like summer camp romances, and they have their first sexual experiences at summer camp. So summer camp is a place of growing up, and it's a place where kids kind of learn about themselves and learn about their identities. And in Friday the 13th, it literally is what it is, where it's the ones who go off to have sex get murdered, or while they're having sex, Jason drowns and causes the whole trauma.
The Friday the 13th franchise is 12 movies. It's so weird to think that this simple little camp movie ended up in outer space and then versus Freddy Krueger.
He goes to hell at one point?
I've seen all of the movies, and it's so interesting watching Friday the 13th 1 and 2, how charming and modest these films are.
Mm-hmm.
You know Jason, if you haven't seen the films, as the hockey mask wearing killer with the machete. He doesn't wear a hockey mask till the third film, and he doesn't really get that whole stuntman machete thing going until Kane Hodder starts to play him late in the series. And then later on, he's not even at Camp Crystal Lake anymore. He's on a boat. He's in New York. He's in hell. He's in random other forests. He gets cryogenically frozen and reanimated in space. He fights Freddy Krueger, so on. And in these early movies, he's just like a Deliverance, Texas Chainsaw forest dude. He's not complex.
In the second movie, that's what he is.
He's not a legendary monster.
He's not in the first movie to the last 3 minutes.
Yeah. So after the murder in the opening credits, the plot becomes about this ragtag group of teenagers trying to fix up
and reopen this camp.
Right.
10 years after those murders, or like 15 years after, reopening this camp led by this one guy who's kind of spearheading the effort.
Right. You've got a lot of things right off the bat. You see this pretty girl come into town. Everyone tells her, you probably shouldn't open up this camp. It's cursed. Specifically, one guy who's become a trope of horror movies.
Old Phil.
I think he's Old Ben, isn't he?
I don't know. I thought it was Old Phil.
This is Nick from the future. It's Old Ralph.
Anyway, the gatekeeper says, it's cursed, you know.
Yeah, he has a really weird accent. I was trying to place his accent.
it's once again like the old town yokel is right. It's the Shakespearean fool. It's it's the person who seems crazy, but really they're the most in touch with what's going on.
Right. We talked about that in the last time with Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a couple other movies.
Right. The Omen / the Shakespearean fool. Then one of the sequences that I think really defines that this is going to be a great suspenseful film is that this pretty teenager who we've been following, she gets picked up by a truck and we don't see who's driving.
We never see the person driving who she's speaking to. Exterior shots of the car too far away to see through the windows.
As soon as
which is a trope that they stole from Halloween.
And as soon as that happens, you know something's wrong.
Right. Then they drive past the camp and they start going faster and faster, and it escalates into a really well done chase murder scene.
So now you know there's a murderer. There's not a masked killer. We haven't seen a killer. We don't even know the gender of the killer.
No, all the kills are from POV.
And there's no specific language about like, ma'am, could you please pull over? Or sir, could you please pull over? We don't know who it is, you know? Then it proceeds through a series of sex and death scenes, very psychoanalytical. I want to say also that we have a final girl in this character, Alice. But once again, going back to my disavowals of the virgin trope, she's not.
She's actually hooking up with the guy who's leading the whole thing.
I think she's much younger than him, too.
Yeah, he's like 40 and she's like 17.
Right.
Because it's, the 80s.
The 80s.
And they're hooking up. They're not. You don't see them. You never see her naked or have sex on screen.
But she smokes weed. She drinks.
Yeah.
She plays strip Monopoly.
But that's why. But she's still presented visually to the audience as being more innocent and conservative than the other girls.
Her sexuality is not explicit, and it's not so much, once again, like a judgment or like a morality play, but it's more like as the sexual tension heightens, just the language of this killer's mind is triggered, you know? Right. So like in this case, spoiler alert, what you find out at the end is that it's the mother of a boy with some sort of physical deformity and probably an intellectual disability to Jason, who drowned while teenagers were having sex sometime in the 50s or 60s. And she now is one kind of revenge killing because she doesn't want them to open the camp, but is also in a more direct sense just like reverse psychoing.
Right, where she's a mother who speaks in the voice of her son and talks to her dead son. She's schizophrenic with... She got like multiple personality syndrome with her dead son.
Kill her, mommy. Kill her.
Right, which is like the exact reverse of what Psycho was.
Yeah.
But I remember there's this great scene where this woman's talking to Kevin Bacon. Oh yeah, it was one of Kevin Bacon's first movies. And she says like, I have this reoccurring dream that it's raining outside and then it starts raining blood. And then it does start raining right there. And those are moments where you kind of feel like the film is almost, I don't know, like a little bit, well, the living metaphor presenting itself. The living metaphor, these kids' sexuality and their dreams are literally like triggering this horrific world around them. We'll get more into dreams in chapter 3.
Yeah, I've had this dream about 5 or 6 times where I'm in a thunderstorm. And it's raining really hard. It sounds like pebbles when it hits the ground. I can hear it. I try to block out the sound with my hands, only it doesn't work. It just keeps getting louder and louder. And then the rain turns to blood. And the blood washes away in little rivers. And then the sound stops.
It's just a dream.
Yeah, I know. I call it my show.
Hey, this is no dream. Come on, we're gonna get soaked.
Well, one last thing before we move on to the sequel. There isn't also an interesting idea presented where it is this kind of young woman with undefined sexuality who is facing off against a mother figure.
Yeah.
And the idea of the mother versus the youthful woman.
Yeah.
And we'll see that kind of... And in this, she just defeats her and cuts her head off with a machete. But we'll see it come full circle when we talk about the finale of Friday the 13th Part 2, which why don't we move on to that movie now?
First of all, important to say that the writer of the screenplay of the original Friday the 13th, his name is Victor Miller. He wanted the film to just be a one-off, and the killer's Miss Voorhees, and then she dies. Jason is a dead kid from her past. He never shows up. Tom Savini, who we may have mentioned before, who had gotten popular from working on Dawn of the Dead, is that right?
Yes, Dawn of the Dead, 1978.
He got hired, and he would be a figure who would majorly define what slashers looked like. We'll talk about some more movies he worked on soon. He is a special effects guy who he did these kind of special effects that are really gory, but they also allow for the camera to linger for a long time on a gore scene. In a lot of older movies, the gore would be like a splatter and then it cuts away because they can't get the effect too right, so they don't want to hold the camera.
Which you see that in Dawn of the Dead with the head explosion.
Right, but Tom Savini got to a point where he's like, I can just like have a pitchfork goring someone and you can just hold on that for like, 30 seconds, and it gets really graphic. So a lot of the deaths, like Kevin Bacon gets killed by an arrow coming up under the bed through his neck. It's really bloody. There's throat slit of the woman in the woods. And then at the end,
Miss Voorhees gets her head chopped off with a machete.
Which is fantastic. But then Tom Savini, we talked about Carrie in our Madonna episode of the last episode. Tom Savini so loved the end of Carrie where the hand reaches out from the grave that he decided Jason should make an appearance, even though Jason was supposed to be dead this whole time. So inexplicably, with no real explanation that doesn't really make any sense, though they do try to explain it in future movies, as this woman is floating in the middle of the lake on her canoe, a mutilated, drowned boy corpse zombie pops out of the lake and grabs her.
Yeah.
Now, by the end of this film, it seems like a supernatural element has just jumped in and we've got a zombie on our hands. But in the second movie, they make it explicit that it's not a zombie and that it's just a dude.
I think that there is just an inconsistency. At the end of Friday the 13th, the implication is either she imagined it or it was a zombie child in the lake.
The boy. Is he dead too?
Who?
The boy, Jason.
Jason?
In the lake, the one who attacked me, the one who pulled me underneath the water.
Ma'am, we didn't find any boy.
Then he's still there.
Those are the only two possible explanations. Then we'll move on to Friday the 13th Part 2, where we get a whole new scenario presented to us.
Right, so our final girl gets killed off in the very beginning.
Right, which I was going to talk about. I think that that's the first time they did that, because this is the first major sequel we get.
Yeah.
But that becomes a recurring trope in this and in Nightmare on Elm Street, where they have a new protagonist, and then the first scene of the next movie is that protagonist being killed off.
It makes sense in the classic legendary hero cycle, too, how, like, Obi-Wan had to die to pass on the journey to Luke, and now Luke will probably die in the new Star Wars, who knows? You know? It's this, the mentor dies so the new hero can take their place.
Right, Halloween is the only one where Jamie Lee Curtis stayed on.
Well,
not that she was in every movie, but she never got killed off to make way for a new protagonist.
Until the 4th and the 5th, but then they said it was witness protection. We can get into that later. Yeah. But yeah, for Halloween too, right? So she gets killed in the beginning. We get introduced actually to one of my favorite final girls, kind of a nondescript final girl named Ginny.
Paul, look, the course starts today, right? Well, here I am. And I promise you, I'll never, ever be late again in my entire life.
Who's this headstrong, snarky, very atypical of your virginal final girl, sandy blonde. And she comes to camp late, ready to fix up the camp next to Camp Blood now. And she's a good, she's a good match for Jason.
And this is something that we're going to bring up later. Someone needs to take old Phil seriously at this point.
Old Ralph.
Because there were like 9 murders last year. And and then he shows up and he's like, "Don't go there. I told the last people not to go there." And everyone's like, "Oh, we're going anyway."
Yeah.
And it's like, at what point do you stop showing up to this place where murders are happening? Or at what point do you take threats seriously? And that's something we're going to talk about in all these movies, where people refuse to take victims seriously, refuse to listen to them when they tell them there's a killer.
Right. Yeah, why? It seems also like these films, because of the necessity of fake outs, it makes it seem like in the 80s, playing pranks, pretending to be seriously injured or dead, or pretending to be a murderer was the most popular joke in the world.
Yeah.
Because it happens constantly. There's even parts where people are literally endangering each other. And it's like, take a joke, why don't you?
Well, in Friday the 13th Part 1, the one guy pretends to drown.
And he also fires an arrow at her, but it just misses. And he goes, sweetheart, you're beautiful when you're mad.
Oh, my God.
There's also the recurring character in these movies, because it was blending with the teen sex comedy, of the, like, snarky funny guy who's just...
He's never funny. He's always the worst.
Oh, he's the worst. Nothing's as bad as Girls' Night Out.
No, we'll get to that.
Easily the worst.
But in this movie, the sexual energy is way amped up. The majority of this movie is just couples flirting and then kind of going off to have sex and getting killed. Like, that was in the first movie too, but in this one it's way amped up.
Right. Well, what I like is one of those scenes is this this kind of beatniky looking couple. The girl says, "I really want to go check out Camp Blood." They're talking about Camp Crystal Lake from the first movie. And he's like, "No, we can get in trouble." And she goes, "What are you, chicken shit?" And it's like, kids like to sneak into things, but like this intense desire to
No, she like hears about it and she needs to go.
Yeah, it definitely represents sex. It's like, we got to do this thing, and he's like, I don't know, I'm kind of nervous. She's like, oh, come on, let's do it. And it's called Camp Blood, which is this like, blood of innocence lost, blood of adolescence, it's menstruation, all that.
Well, there's
shit.
also, speaking of menstruation, there's a part where he warns the girls to stay clean on their periods.
Yeah, stay clean on your menstrual cycle.
Because of bears.
Because of bears.
Which we now, of course, know is not true. But that was like a common kind of misogynist myth.
But also, what a great metaphor, right?
Yeah.
Living metaphor for like, your new womanhood will attract death to this place, Right.
Which is, of course, kind of the theory of the whole movie.
Right, exactly. So this one, it's not Miss Voorhees. It turns out Deliverance Texas Chainsaw style Jason, no hockey mask yet, just wearing overalls, a plaid shirt, some boots.
And like a bag over
pillowcase over his head. Is stalking around murdering everybody.
Right.
He saw his mother get killed in the first film.
Right, they completely
they retcon the whole
everything.
thing.
Where he is still alive, living in the woods. I guess his mom was visiting him in the woods or what? It's not clear. A lot is not clear. This movie is not about the
his mom knew
details.
he was alive. I think he was like stalking through the woods, just like being crazy. And,
Okay.
like, saw his mom get murdered. It triggered a response, and now he's on a killing spree.
Yeah, and he's killing people. This is where his kills become way more directly from Bay of Blood. There's a part where he skewers a couple having sex through with a spear, which is the most visually metaphor thing I could ever imagine.
Oh, yeah.
But also that is directly from Bay of Blood.
Directly.
And also, the way he kills the guy in the wheelchair is with the same weapon from Bay of Blood, that like curved machete, and he hacks him right in the face with it. And then sends his wheelchair down the stairs.
Total Texas Chainsaw reference there, too.
The wheelchair down the stairs.
With the intellectually disabled killing the physically disabled, who rolls back in the wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
And the sad thing is that this time, the guy in the wheelchair...
was just about to get laid.
Oh, yeah. Unlike Franklin, he was just about to get laid, and he was like a really likable guy.
Right, whereas Franklin's a horrible asshole.
Yeah, exactly. When you're young, I don't know if anyone else remembers this, you might, before you lose your virginity, have a lot of dreams that you're about to get laid, and then you wake up. Mm-hmm. That's what this is like.
That's what this whole movie
It's like, I'm
is.
about to get laid. Oh, hatchet to the face. Shit.
Yeah.
Dream over. So, yeah.
This movie also, I think, is maybe the first slasher movie to do the car won't start trope.
Yeah.
Jason's chasing her and her car won't start. I don't know if that's been done thousands of times since, of course, but I don't know if it had been done before.
But they set it up a little bit in this one because she gets there late, and I think
the car's having trouble.
Yeah, she's like, the car's having problems.
So at least they established it.
No other later slashers wouldn't bother.
No, the car doesn't start.
I'm sorry. Okay? But my car's sick.
Well, you could have called.
Paul, I tried, but your phones aren't even working yet.
Yeah. So one of the main reasons why I really like the final girl in this film is because of the way the film ends, which is, in my opinion, what makes it one of, or the best Friday the 13th film.
Mm-hmm. She finally finds out where he's been living in the woods.
It's a Texas Chainsaw type situation where he has this altar of corpses, tableau style killings, right? And in the center of it all is his mother's head,
right,
which he worships.
Yes.
And her sweater from the first film. So our final girl is a clever one.
Yes. So she realizes in the last film the final girl defeated the mother figure, right? But then in this film the final girl has to defeat the child. And so how does she do that? She has to become the mother figure.
Embrace the Madonna.
Yes.
She puts on the sweater and she says, "Jason, you've done a great job, Jason," and Mother is very pleased.
Mother is pleased. I have that in my notes.
Yeah, and Jason falls for it. He gets fucking delusional and says, "Oh, this is my mom talking to me." Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And he starts to submit to her and put his weapon down.
Jason! It's all done, Jason. You've done your job well, and Mommy is pleased. That's a good boy. Now come to Mommy. Come on.
Yeah, but she isn't totally ready to be a mother yet.
No.
She hasn't quite achieved that aspect in her life because he sees the head behind her when she leans forward and realizes that it's a trick.
Yep.
Jason, Mother is talking to you!
Jason, Mother is talking to you.
And so doesn't quite work out for her.
No, she does seemingly kill him, but then there's the double fake where he jumps through the window and grabs her, which might also be a dream because then she wakes up in the hospital bed.
Yeah, the ending is really unclear. He jumps through the window and grabs her, and the other guy's still alive, and then it cuts to the morning, and she's being taken off, and she's going, "Where's Paul? Where's Paul?" or whatever his name is, and he's not seen, so we don't know if he's been killed or not. We don't know where Jason is. Like, it just kind of jumps ahead 10 hours without telling you what happened.
It's still a great movie, a good movie.
It is really good.
A very good movie, and in my opinion, the best of the Friday the 13th films is the second one.
Yeah, it's really good. There was a couple of things I wanted to mention real quick. This is one of the few slasher movies where the goofy guy and the black guy both live.
Yeah, the goofy guy decides to stay at the bar.
The goofy guy and the black guy stay out. They don't come back to the camp, and we never see them again.
In this case, drinking and not going home and being the last one at the bar saves their freaking lives.
Yeah, and maybe they got some prostitutes too. So
the
who
guy
knows?
says, "You got any after-hour places?" Yes, boss. Yes, boss. Yes, boss. And he lives.
Yeah. Also, they had a really interesting fake out where you think the dog Muffin, you think is dead, and then he shows up again at the end.
Oh yeah, that's so great. That's so great. And right before Jason jumps in the window.
Yeah, she's Muffin.
And it's like this sonorous music playing. Yeah. Fantastic.
So that's your favorite Friday movie?
It goes like this: Friday 2, Friday 1, Friday 7, Friday 6, and then the rest are bullshit.
I've seen like Swiss cheese with the franchise. I've seen like jumped around. I think I haven't seen the third one or the fourth. Which one's the one with the psychic girl?
The seventh one.
I like that one.
That one's pretty good. It's The New Blood. That one's actually pretty good. This franchised out into like ad nauseum. Jason Goes to Hell is unwatchable. Jason Takes Manhattan. He doesn't go to Manhattan. He's just on a boat the whole time.
It's pretty funny.
Jason X, I can't even begin. And then Freddy vs. Jason. There were so many great screenplays written for that, and the one they made sucked. And then they remade it. Whatever. Who gives a shit?
Did they remake it?
Yeah. And then I think the third one it's really boring, but it was a financial success, and it was originally released in 3D. And there's so many deaths that are like 3D deaths.
Because you try to be basing, Friday the 13th, I'ma play Jason.
My thoughts grip your throat and make it hard to breathe. Your whole camp's under siege, and I'm Jason Voorhees.
The chosen one, the cyborg relation. My shit is crazy like Freemasons, meeting at Camp Crystal Lake with Jason.
1981 also saw the creation of one of the slasher films. The only one one of two slasher films we'll be discussing in this chapter, which we consider to be a great film.
Right.
A truly great film.
And it's not a camp movie, but it is about camping. It's not about summer camp, it's about, like, backpacking. So we're still going to count it.
This one feels very minimal. Once again, I'm realizing more and more and more how much Deliverance was an influence on all of these kind of films. This film is once again like people going into really raw, rural, untamed nature.
Right, it's a lot like the Deliverance meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The movie we're talking about is Just Before Dawn.
A nightmare has begun. It will find you in the hour when dream and reality merge. The last desperate moment of darkness.
Hey, who is it?
Just before dawn. My dear Lucille.
And this is a really underrated and kind of undersung movie. It opens really well with this beautiful, like, creepy bird call sound.
Yeah.
And these empty shots of the woods. And it, like, from the very first scene is establishing a really dark tone. And then it's these two old guys, and it's the old man who we'll see later in Sleepaway Camp.
Yeah.
And they come into a cabin, and he, like, sees a face through the hole in the roof.
It's a church.
In the church, and then one of the guys gets murdered by this large burly man.
Yeah, very creepy killer.
Very creepy killer, and it's very abrupt and sudden, and it doesn't have a lot of the, like, slasher noises. They're like,
Yeah, it's a little more Texas Chainsaw-y in that way.
It's kind of done in, like, a stripped down, Texas Chainsaw style, where it's a little bit more raw, and it's happening in the daytime.
Yeah.
So it is a slasher, but it forgoes some of slasher style elements.
Yeah, and also it doesn't have as much gore as later slashers will have. have. It's not about the blood. It's more about the suspense.
Right.
And what I think you mentioned how it opens with this whistling noise as the theme. What I think is really interesting about that is that noise, as you said, it sounds like a bird call. But what you start to realize through the movie is that there's two killers who are twins.
Right, which is a really good midpoint reveal.
Right. And they use this bird call to communicate about where they are in the forest.
Yeah.
So it has that uncanny sound of animal, but not quite animal, almost human.
And this is a movie that really wasn't known or talked about. Like, it wasn't very popular, but we love it. We think it should be more known.
Yeah, it was derided as, I think, a nasty. It wasn't a video nasty, but it was derided as The Burning, which we'll get to, was a video nasty.
Yeah.
But this was, I don't think so. But it wasn't well known, and it got the reputation for being just like another blood movie. But many episodes ago, we talked about a little slasher we love called All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, and someone on the old IMDb message boards once wrote, there's definitely more to this movie. That's the same way I feel about Just Before Dawn. At the end, the final girl, virginal character has transformed into a different kind of woman with a different sort of look on her face.
Well, let's talk about her for a minute.
Okay.
Because throughout the movie, she's kind of being shit on by her boyfriend. He's, like, disrespecting her and, like, kind of scaring her. And she's not well regarded by her friends.
And her foil is over the top. Her foil is doing makeup in the trailer on the way into the woods. And she goes, you might meet someone cute out here.
Right.
In the middle of nowhere.
Right. So then at the end, and we're not going to go step by step through the movie, but at the end, it's just her and her boyfriend left. The rest have been killed. Her boyfriend is very badly injured, and they're the only two left. And she kills the final killer by shoving her fist down his throat in one of the most sexually explicit murders.
Reverse penetration.
Yeah.
She pegs his face.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, she is no longer this disrespected outcast. And the film ends with her boyfriend holding her legs and crying as she stands there confidently, having come into her own. It's a total reverse of roles from the way the movie started.
Honestly, there's two films in this chapter you should just pause and go watch right now. Just Before Dawn is fantastic. We'll get to the other one in a bit.
This is also an example of when minimalism works.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about in a minute when minimalism doesn't work.
Yeah.
But this is one where the stripped down quality really makes it eerie and gets it under your skin.
Totally. It's atmospheric on so many levels in the cinematography, the acting, the simple plot, and most of all, the sound design.
Yeah. And the killers are very creepy. These two
very
fat,
scary,
burly, like, country bumpkin brothers.
I have some friends who, like, never watch movies, and I was watching this one day, and it was one of the only days I ever knew that they sat down and watched the whole thing with me. It's captivating.
Yeah. We don't have that much to say about it, mostly because it doesn't follow slashers very closely, and it doesn't have a lot of the themes that we're getting at, but it's definitely worth mentioning, and it's definitely a good pick.
I think I'm going to mention this again in Chapter 4. This is one of the greats, people. Just Before Dawn, a truly great slasher.
Yeah.
But a lot of people started trying to kind of copy what Friday the 13th was doing, particularly a little pervert from New York named Harvey Weinstein decided, I'm going to capitalize on this shit.
And he wrote a script called The Burning, 1981.
This summer, if you're planning to go camping, don't. If you're looking forward to midnight swims, don't.
Sneak on back to the campsite. Get some matches. Build us a hot fire. Don't be long.
And if you're thinking about being with someone where no one can see you, don't.
Right now, he's out there, watching, waiting.
Who's there?
What happened one summer 5 years ago is about to happen again, and again, and again. The Burning.
The Burning is a combination of a Friday the 13th knockoff and a telling of Staten Island urban legend.
Right.
There's been a running legend, there's a documentary about this, on Staten Island starting way back in the mid to early 20th century about a psycho killer named Cropsey. He's just your basic standard archetype for a psycho killer.
Mm-hmm. He's an old man living in the woods. In this case, he was horribly burned in a prank gone wrong.
Right. In the opening scene, a bunch of kids decide to play a prank on the mean, drunk, abusive old camp janitor or is he just like a camp disciplinarian?
He's Old Man Cropsy.
He's Old Man Cropsy.
I think he's the groundskeeper, like
Yeah.
Willie. He's like
Yeah.
the gardener and stuff.
So they light a skull covered in worms with candle eyes. This is, I guess, pranks you did back then.
Involved.
In his cabin, and Cropsy sleeps next to his teddy bear of gasoline, and he spills it, and whoa, and he's lit aflame. Then he goes to the city, so for a second starts to not feel like a slasher.
He buys a prostitute and kills her.
He's in the burn ward. The first kill of him killing a prostitute is really disturbing and doesn't feel like a slasher. It feels like more something like from like Maniac.
Yeah, Maniac or like Driller Killer.
Right, much more
very grindhouse,
urban grindhouse, gross. But then he goes back to his traumatic.
Well,
roots.
no. Then we get 45 minutes of fake outs. We go to camp. So this movie does like fake outs worse than a lot of other movies. You go to camp. The like girl loses her ball. She goes out in the woods, and like it's a lot of like POVs of people coming up behind people, and then it's just, oh hey Rick, I'm sorry I scared you there.
There's a great shot. It's a stock shot, but they keep reusing it of Cropsy raising his signature weapon is these like big garden shears of him raising these garden shears up, and they shine in the sun, and they keep using that same shot over and over again, and you never really see Cropsy in the same shot as someone he's going to kill until the end. It's just this stock footage intercut over and over again.
But then the real plot happens when a group of campers go off on like a day trip.
It's the trip out, the camp away trip. We did this and it was fucking scary as shit. And they go to Devil's Creek. What I will give them credit for is they got a whole cast for the camp before they go on that trip. They had like, a solid 100 kids.
Right, it wasn't like the Sleepaway Camp sequels where there were 12 kids.
Friday the 13th and Friday the 13th too, or most of the Friday the 13th.
Well, in those movies, it's the counselors before the camp opens.
They actually went for it and got the whole camp. So, we're I want to address this. We're not going to get into a bunch of current events and scandals, but everyone who's anyone right now knows that Harvey Weinstein finally got his just desserts and got called out for being a gross, manipulative, rapist pervert. And this was the film that launched his career and Bob Weinstein's career. Now, a lot of awful people make good movies, and we're not here to criticize this movie just because a bad guy made it. But what's interesting, one of the main heroes of this movie is a pervy little kid who sneaks up on girls and watches them in the shower because he wanted to just scare them. And it's the little Woody Allen kid from Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
But the interesting thing about that is that was a common sympathetic character in 80s movies. That's like Ducky from Pretty in Pink.
Oh, he's not that pervy.
Or Ducky really is.
It's more like the guys from Revenge of the Nerds.
Or the Revenge of the Nerds guys, or Anthony Michael Hall in 16 Candles.
More like Judd Nelson in Breakfast Club. Same thing.
Okay, but like that character was a character in the 80s. So like you see you see like the nerdy guy being creepy and pervy a lot as a sympathetic character back then.
Right. And the villain is supposed to be this big jock named Glazer. And honestly, in a lot of scenes where Glazer's like, "Hey, you're a weirdo, man." I'm Glazer,
you're right.
Glazer, you're completely right. Also, I kind of like Glazer. But there's also multiple sex scenes in this film where it's a girl being like, "Would you back off?" And he's like, "The fuck you come out here for then?" Like multiple. I can't help but wonder, what angle was Harvey writing this from? Like, it really seems like it's these dickhead dudes with these poor girls, There's one sex scene where a girl follows a guy into the lake, and he goes, "I promise I won't try anything." Then he does, and she says, like, "I told you to back off," and he goes, "Get the fuck out of here then." And she goes on shore, and her clothes are gone, and then she gets murdered. It's horrible. And I can only imagine.
Can't catch a break.
Like, it feels like it's really about, like, oh, this poor thing, and, like, sex is awful, and virginity loss is this, like, dark mirror nightmare. But knowing it was written by Harvey Weinstein, I can't help but wonder what he's really trying to say.
Well, why don't we talk about this movie as a slasher, at least briefly? It's a good one. It's very enjoyable.
Tom Savini's back.
Doing really good gore effects. There's one scene on a raft that's really excellent and well done and surprising.
Tired. I'm tired. What do you mean you're tired? We're doing all the work up here.
Shut up, Woodstock! Hey, will you all please shut the fuck up and just keep paddling, okay?
All right.
Let's go. Please, let's go.
Eddie?
What?
How come Karen left early?
Hey, look, it's like Michelle said, okay? She was upset about something, all right?
Come on, we're not...
Hey, you guys! Look over there! What? It's one of our canoes! It is! It's ours!
No, it isn't.
It is too! It's gotta be!
Yeah, who else would be stupid enough to
Let's
lose
go!
it?
Right!
Come on! Dig in there. Let's go!
Come on!
Everybody
go. Come on, hard. Barbara, you can do harder than that. Woody, get ready to grab it, man.
We're gonna go on, so you gotta get ready to hold on.
All right.
But it's not super notable. It didn't really bring anything that new or original, unlike some other movies we're going to talk about. It kind of just is another good retreading of familiar stuff.
Yes. So these films are also... All the films we're discussing here in Chapter 2 are films about the forest, and a lot of them are about camp, but they're all about the forest. The Burning does a good job of creating, similar to Friday the 13th, creating these like primal landscapes for this early adolescent sexual experimentation to happen. That aspect of it, I really like. It's also worth noting it's got Jason Alexander, George Costanza, in one of his early roles.
Early roles as a teenager.
And some other people who you might notice from later on.
But and then it has a pretty good third act, a little bit too long in some parts.
They reveal that the like lead guy, there's kind of a final guy and a final girl, like a final couple who
kind
are
of
both,
like Friday the 13th Part 2.
Right, who are kind of like these strong couple together. It reveals that final guy was one of the kids who originally burned Cropsey and turned him into the monster he is, and they finished the job. They burn him to death.
Well, one thing that this movie does and that Friday the 13th Part 2 does, though we haven't seen in a couple of movies, is it really draws on urban legends.
Yeah.
It's really revisiting the idea of urban legends come true.
And at the end, the last scene is a guy retelling the story of Cropsey now that Cropsey's dead, and we see that Cropsey has entered the zeitgeist of urban legends.
Yeah. Speaking of urban legends and people telling stories around the campfire, another really cheap camp movie that is kind of aping both of these and not doing it nearly as well is Madman from the following year, 82.
Don't laugh at the tales. Heed if you call him the legend lives. Beware the madman Mars. The legend lives.
Madman is a very cynical film, both in the sense that they barely tried, and also in that it's very dark and minimal. You could like that about it. We love the Italian film Burial Ground for being minimal. This one is almost minimal to a lazy extent.
Yeah, it's like a really hard movie to watch. It's so much just paint by numbers, plugging in the parts to make a horror movie, but not even plugging them in that well. It opens with a guy telling the story of Madman Mars.
And then that just is the killer.
That just is the killer. But more than that, in the opening scene, as he's telling the story, we're seeing clips from later in the movie of like kills happening. And so everything that then happens in the movie we've already seen. So there's no suspense, there's no surprise, there's no shock, because we already know everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's it's like generic slasher film number 4.
Well,
generic forest slasher, it could have been called.
Yeah, and also like they try to do the teenage sex element, but it's so ham-fisted. The teenagers are all like in their 40s.
Yeah, and they act like it too. Early on, the guy makes like a sexual advance towards a girl, and she's like, back off. And then later, he stands up at dinner and he goes, I want to make a formal apology for my behavior earlier. It's like a workplace.
Yeah.
And that's actually something I kind of like through the Friday the 13th, The Burning, and this, is there's always the kind of like really responsible, mature characters, and they're sort of interesting.
But then there's the one part of this movie that I just remember being so laughable, where they try to do like a sexy teen sex scene, and they're in a jacuzzi, and there's like romantic music playing, and they're circling around each other, and the guy's like spinning in circles and like has this awkward smile. It's one of the most awkwardly shot and made scenes that I've ever seen in a movie.
And then Madman Mars stares through the glass at them. He looks in at the jacuzzi couple, and Madman Mars is like a Yeti meets Cropsey meets...
He's a lot like the killer from Hell Night.
Yeah, he kind of is Frankenstein-y.
Yeah.
I really kept thinking it was going to be revealed to be one of them, and they were going to pull the mask off. So there's no mystery here. To be fair, there's no mystery in The Burning either, but it still felt more like there was a mystery.
Well, The Burning had suspense and tension, which this didn't. And it also had characters. This movie barely has characters.
But in the end, it's not a movie that anyone really remembered. It came out like right in the middle of this craze taking off, and it just kind of rode the wave.
There's really not much to say about it other than that it's a generic Friday knockoff.
I think it's kind of admirable in its minimalism, just that aspect, but that's also what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
And it's at a certain point it becomes incredibly like Henny Penny, you know that sequence where they all just go in one by that fairy tale where they go in one by one and just are killed by the fox.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll try it now, said Lucy Goosey, and the fox killed her. And then I'll try it now, said Chicky Wicky, and the fox killed her. There's literally like the last 50 minutes is just, where did they go? I'll go look for them. Oh, he didn't come back. I'll go look for him. Oh, they didn't come back. We'll go together and look for them.
But also, it's if you want to, you can admire something for its minimalism if minimalism is the stylistic choice that they're making. In this case, minimalism is due to the laziness and the lack of a budget.
Okay, so Madman doesn't have a mystery element. Friday the 13th, the original, has a mystery. Friday the 13th, Part 2, has no mystery. Well, no, it does. The Burning has no mystery, except for the fact that we reveal who the guy is. Madman really doesn't have any mystery at all.
Just Before Dawn has no mystery and no even attempted explanation.
Just Before Dawn does have mystery in the sense that it's about why is this family killing, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's just that they are killing. Same with Texas Chainsaw. It's just that they are killing.
The next film we're going to be discussing, another one of the films in the slasher genre that we consider to be a truly great film, is the pinnacle of slasher mystery storytelling.
Not just slasher mystery, but it also is the pinnacle of sexual metaphor. The movie, of course, is Sleepaway Camp from 1983.
This is a good point to pause and say that something I get incredibly tired of in the world of slashers is the fact that a lot of people love these movies. Like, you'll read reviews of Sleepaway Camp or Just Before Dawn, or even masterpieces like Slumber Party Massacre 2, where people write in the user comments, so bad it's good, or like horrible fun.
Well, they did Sleepaway Camp on that podcast, How Did This Get Made, as a terrible movie.
Right, so fuck y'all, because this is a great movie.
No, Sleepaway Camp's excellent.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I remember watching this in the basement for the first time at your place. We can't linger too long. We love this movie so much that we could easily do an entire episode on it.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a lot to pull out of this movie, too, in terms of, like, sexual context.
I always introduce it as, this is the best summer camp slasher and the gayest slasher you will ever see.
Right. The whole movie's about...
And people always say, Nick, that's really offensive. And I'm like, no, I'm not making a joke. I mean, this movie's super gay.
It's very much about, like, being sexual and gender non-binary.
And being confused about your identity.
Yeah, the whole movie's about gender roles and gender identity. There's this
and sexuality.
There's this running theme throughout the movie of all the boys at this camp are secretly gay and, like, don't know how to express that properly. So much of the film has homoerotic subtext to it.
Yeah.
And it also has abusive subtext in the part where, you know,
child molester.
The cook tries to molest Angela.
And the very old camp counselor's having an affair with the 16-year-old girl who's, like, overjoyed that he asked her out.
Yeah, and there's all this stuff where, like, the boys are more interested in playing pranks on the girls than hooking up with them.
Yeah, so the basic gist is we open with our past trauma of two kids, a boy and a girl, and their dad, who is gay, and they fall in the water, and then some reckless teens, Friday the 13th 1 style, just motorboat over the fucking family.
Holy shit! Turn it! Turn the wheel! Give me the wheel! Oh my God! Somebody help the people! Look at the fire, John! Get him out of the boat, please! Oh my God!
And then we see only one child from behind, just their hair flapping up and down in the water. Cut to several years later, this child has grown up into the young girl Angela at her cousin's house, where the cousin's mother starts saying, "Here's your medical records. Give these directly to the camp. I wrote them myself. I am a medical doctor." Which seems a little strange, but you don't really understand what they're saying. You don't really pay attention to it.
She's such a good character.
Fantastic. Fantastic performance.
Look what I did. I packed you and your cousin some goodies for the ride up to camp. Wasn't that nice of me? Any chips? Why, of course. I believe there's a whole bag. Why, I'm almost sure of it.
Then it's your typical camp slasher, camp full of perverts. You got this old mobster running the joint. You got Ronnie, his lover, and who's wearing the bulge shorts.
Ronnie, the most sexually explicit Italian man.
I got a big salami for you. And then you got the chef who directly says, I love molesting children, and he tries to do that early on. And someone's killing them off. They keep threatening this girl, Angela. The other girls also
She doesn't really talk.
The other girls, once again, we're getting back to kind of our Alice, Sweet Alice themes, where like the other girls don't like her. She's not girly enough.
No, she's very much bullied for being not girly, not precocious, not flirting with boys.
Hey, Angela.
Hey, Angela. How come you never take showers when the rest of us do? Huh? You queer or something? I know what it is. You haven't reached puberty yet. Is that it? I bet you don't even have your period. That's enough, Judy. Angela's allowed to shower in the morning or any other time she wants to. Yeah. She takes showers when no one can see. She has no hair down below. Judy, she's a real carpenter's dream. The light is a board and needs a screw. That's enough. Fuck off.
Yeah, they're really mean. And then people are getting murdered. First, the child molester chef gets burned with a vat of boiling water. Then a kid who's mean to Angela gets stabbed in the neck in a canoe. Then another kid who's mean to Angela gets a hive of bees thrown into the crapper with him. And it goes on and on like this.
They think it's the old mobster dude thinks it's her cousin who's doing all the killing.
Right.
But throughout this, you get all these scenes of like the boys playing weird kind of like homoerotic pranks on each other.
Yeah, put your face in my ass.
or
like a baseball game that's way too intense.
Ditching the girls to go like there's a scene where they're all at the beach and the girls are like flirting with these guys and they're just like, no, we're gonna go be with the boys or whatever.
Yeah, come on, boys. And then even later on, the cousin's like, this would be a better summer if there were more guys around. It's very explicitly gay camp, and the girls are like these abandoned war wives almost, where they're all like getting together and they all hate Angela because Angela's the only one getting any attention for some weird reason, even though she's like an underdeveloped child. So I really recommend more than any other film that you pause this podcast, that you can even pause it for a few days, however long it takes you, to go find 1983's Sleepaway Camp and watch this movie because it's great and we're about to spoil it.
Right.
If you don't want spoilers, skip for Sleepaway Camp. Skip to 1 hour, 9 minutes, and 16 seconds.
Right, so it turns out that Angela is the killer, and she's been killing people because she's actually born a boy and been forced to grow up as a girl by her abusive stepmother.
Now, some people might say that this film, in a similar vein to Dress to Kill, is very transphobic. Quite the contrary. This film is about the horrors of being trapped in a body that you don't feel comfortable in, and the horrors of lashing out at a world that won't let you be who you really are.
Right. So this young boy was forced to become a girl to fill in for his crazy aunt's gender role, needing to have two genders in the house. So they grow up in the wrong identity, the identity that doesn't fit them. And then when they come to Sleepaway Camp, a summer camp where they, as we said earlier, are exposed to some of their first glimpses of sexuality, they kind of, the switch is turned and they go psycho killer.
Also, my friend Max said that this director was being ignorant and blending being gay with being trans, which of course are not the same thing. But I actually think it does fit in the sense that Angela is sent to gay camp and is the only girl getting any attention from the boys because she's a boy, and they can pick up on
and
that.
We see earlier in a flashback that her and her brother, or him and his brother, actually
who knows?
Him and his sister.
No real gender identity because been confused their whole life.
Grew up watching. They saw their gay father having sex with his lover.
Yeah.
So they were early on exposed to...
Great long shot of young Angela pointing at Peter, and it's like, you're me now. You know? Yeah. Fantastic. This film is incredible. There's also a concept called gay panic, which is written a lot about in critical theory, which is this idea that there's a period where someone realizes they're gay but hasn't come out yet. This can go from anywhere from a few years to decades to a lifetime. And during this period, the closeted gay person experiences what we know as gay panic, where they lash out at the world to do anything they can to maintain this cover. Because of how intolerant society is. So this film can also be seen as a major expression of that. Angela lashes out at the world at anyone who tries to expose their secret. The chef who gets burned first tries to molest Angela
would have found out.
Which means would have found out the secret. And also, some of the girls who Angela kills are girls who are like, why don't you ever shower with the rest of us?
Mm-hmm.
You know, people who are trying to expose Angela's secret. You know?
Yeah. So Sleepaway Camp really, it takes the sexual undertones to kind of a whole new level and makes this really interesting, like, kind of artistic camp slasher. And in our opinion, the best summer camp slasher.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely the best summer camp slasher. And they also hired, once again, a full cast of summer camp actors.
Right.
It actually feels like a legit stock
Well, they didn't
summer
do
camp.
that for the sequels.
The sequels are not even worth mentioning.
No, we won't talk about them. They're very funny.
Well, I put them in the chart as
Yeah.
bad. So the last few we should talk about are, let me briefly touch on this Fred Olen Ray film before we end on a good note.
Mm-hmm.
Fred Olen Ray, who's a cynical cash grab director, there's a theme that we're not going to go for. I encourage a film critic out there to take this angle. Friday the 13th 1, Friday the 13th 2, The Burning, Sleepaway Camp, not so much, and Just Before Dawn. You could interpret them all also as white teens paying the sins of the fathers for taking land from the Native Americans, taking lands from the American Indians.
The sins of the past, and not just Native Americans, but any sort of atrocity, is a huge theme of all horror movies.
Right, and also in Friday the 13th 1, the goofy asshole character dances in a very offensive, like, wah, 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 in Indian dance and wears a headdress and makes a mockery of that culture, and then he's killed. And then in the second one, she's making a lot of noise, and the guy said, her boyfriend says, like, hey, quiet, you'll wake the natives, you know? And there's this, like, also, it's important to note that American Indian culture is majorly, like, mixed in with summer camp culture. It's like, oh, we're on the land of this dead civilization that we brutalized, and now we're having fun taking their tribe names for our cabins and stuff. Now, we're not going for that analysis, but it's totally legit.
Well, you kind of just went for it.
Well, there you go. That's like the brief overview. I'm not saying I interpret these movies more as the sexual metaphors we've been discussing, but you could go that angle. That people also say The Shining is that angle. But, you know, the film that most grabs at that angle in a terrible, terrible execution is Scalps by Fred Olen Ray.
They did not listen to the warnings before digging up the sacred ground of the dead.
I'm feeling the evil in this ground. It's alive with evil. Stop it!
Scalps. Now they have awakened a terror unknown. When the dead walk the earth, the living must die. Scalps. 100 years of hatred uncovered.
It's drums. Drums and chanting.
Let me in. Spirits tormented in death ravage cruelty on the living.
Directly, we have some white teens who go to a Native American burial ground where a monstrous American Indian kills them one by one brutally. This is the quality of a Mystery Science Theater 3000 film. It's terrible, it's cynical, it's offensive without being artistically redeeming. I don't recommend it.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention it.
I didn't watch it.
And it does have some really brutal kill scenes and kind of a cool last shot, but it's not worth it. And if you want to make a film that really addresses those issues in such an explicit way, I think you have to have the victims and the final girl. I think the better way to make movies is to have the victims and the final girl be American Indian confronting some ancestor of theirs. Or I don't know. Just do a better movie.
Yeah.
It sucks. Let's end on a good forest slasher.
Right. So 1983, the same year as Sleepaway Camp, you get another movie that's not about summer camp, but is about the forest life. It's about camping. It's about backpack camping.
Right.
And that's The Final Terror.
Your friends aren't really missing. They're not really dead. This is just some kind of joke.
What the hell was that?
That thing that's out there, whatever it is, can't be real. It's just your imagination.
I swear I'm not dreaming. I'm not dreaming.
Or maybe, just this once, you're dead wrong. The Final Terror.
Right. The Final Terror is, I forgot there's 3 films in this category, in this chapter, that are great films.
Yeah, Final Terror is really good.
It's a great movie. it is a kind of sits on the line between slashers and survival films.
It's closer to Deliverance or
Rituals,
which
we mentioned earlier.
To Friday the 13th, probably.
Yeah.
It's about these forest rangers who take these girls out into the woods to go camping.
Yeah.
And then one of them goes missing, and then one of them turns up dead, and you get a slasher scenario on your hands.
Yeah. But it's got a low body count.
Very low. I think only.
But 3 people die.
Yeah. No, 4.
Like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And
it opens with 2 people being murdered.
We have 2 black characters, both of whom survive. I just want to throw that out there. I gotta say, that stereotype, the black guy always dies
we
first.
We only have 1 black character.
There's the girl, too.
Oh, right, the girl.
They both live.
Yeah.
There's actually plenty of slashers where the black people survive.
That's more of like an action movie thing.
Yeah, right.
But it has a really gnarly opening where this motorcycle breaks down on the side of the road, and the 2 people on it get killed off. And the woman of the couple gets killed off with a trap made out of can lids. Like,
right.
Not razor blades, but like rusty can lids. That really sets up the tone of like this very kind of industrious, gross redneck killer.
We've got our Deliverance set up. Someone who uses trash to slash.
Yeah.
Trash to slash.
And Joey Pantaleone plays our outcast figure, Edgar, and he's really good as this like gross redneck weirdo.
Yeah. Yeah, Ralphie from The Sopranos.
Yeah, he plays Edgar.
Cypher from Matrix. The guy from Baby Just Stay Out. You know what I'm talking about. John G. from Memento. Mm-hmm. He plays this, like, y'all shouldn't go this way. He's kind of a mixture between the Harbinger, the Shakespearean fool, and the killer.
He's because they suspect, as soon as people die, they immediately assume that it's Edgar.
Right. We've got a lot of really, really good acting and also really strong survivor characters.
Well, this movie's It's a lot different than a lot of these other slashers in that it's very well made. It's very well shot. It's well directed. It's directed by this guy, Andrew Davis. It was his first major movie, and then he went on to direct a bunch of Steven Seagal movies, a couple Chuck Norris movies. He then made The Fugitive. He made Holes, and he recently, in 2006, made that movie The Guardian with Harrison Ford. So he's not like a fucking amazing filmmaker, but he's had a very prosperous career and he's done well for himself.
You know what? The Fugitive has actually a similar feel to this movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it, the big shots, the shot where he jumps off the waterfall, that feels like this. I love the noises, the sound design, the killer design, and the ending of this film in a lot of ways.
They're just really good scare moments. There's the part where they find a corpse and it's all by flashlight.
Yeah.
And they start off at the head and then with the flashlight, so you never see the whole body. They move down the corpse and it gets more and more gruesome to the point that it's just organs. And it's just a flashlight light going over these organs. Really great reveal.
I love that it's a southern slasher. Not a lot of slashers with characters with a southern twang to their voice.
Yeah, it's like all like it's a rednecks killing other rednecks rather than rednecks killing urban city folk.
Right, exactly.
Which makes it different.
Yeah.
There's also the part where they drop the like just good, inventive, creepy moments.
At the end, spoiler alert, go watch the final tear. We're not really it's not all about the mystery with this one, but they think it's Joe Pantoliano. Turns out it's him and his mother, or it's mostly his mother.
Yeah.
Who's a backwoods, crazy, redneck, hillbilly, Texas Chainsaw type woman who they talked about in the beginning. She's a rape victim who lost her mind in the forest. And that campfire story, once again, reflects this kind of like sexual violence, sexual trauma themes. And she makes this great screaming noise and then is impaled on one of her own traps.
Mom! Mom!
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Really well done.
Picturesque, Grand Guignol sort of ending.
And the movie was really... Most of these movies we watched on, like, YouTube or bad VHS transfers. I watched this movie in this beautiful high-definition film transfer, and it opened with this title crawl that said, this film was pieced together by I forget what the company's called. I think they're called, like, the Scream Team or something. Out of 6 prints that film collectors had. There is no surviving negative of the movie, so they had to make it from these 6 prints, and it looked amazing. There were a couple parts that were like film grainy or choppy, but like it really held up well.
I love how our character at the end is they decide they have to kill Joe Pantoliano, and he says like, all right, this is a good place to do it. And then his friend says, did you take those shrooms? And he's like, we found some magic mushrooms earlier. And it's like, not only do we have a psycho killer, but we kind of have a psycho final guy too.
Yeah.
Like the final guy has become corrupted by the Force just as much.
Well, none of them were like great people to go in
No.
with. Like it's there. We don't have an innocent final girl character. We kind of have these like stumbling buffoons. There's a part where the girl, the British black girl, makes a speech which is like, "You guys are the most unprofessional Forest Rangers ever. You've endangered us. You've ruined this camping trip." And it's like, yeah, dude, they are terrible at their job.
You're getting the worst fucking Yelp review when we get back to Civilization. So Final Terror, great film.
Yeah.
And I think that closes out our overview of forest and summer camp slashers.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back to suburbia, back to the Halloween roots of Haddonfield. Let's go to a little place called Elm Street, in our Chapter 3, Beyond the Wall of Sleep.
What'd you dream? I dreamed about a guy in a dirty red and green sweater.
Well, what about the fingernails?
Oh, he scraped his fingernails along things. Actually, they were more like finger knives or something he'd made himself. But they made a horrible sound. It's like, scream.
Nancy, you dreamed about the same creep I did.
That's impossible.
One of my favorite slasher films of all time. Wes Craven, who had kind of contributed to the birth of the slashers we discussed in the last episode in Chapter 3, with Last House on the Left, the brutal rape revenge film, with The Hills Have Eyes, the brutal hillside cannibal murder film.
Also a revenge film. He'd sort of been on the sidelines watching this genre explode from 80 to 83, and not really participating. He made Deadly Blessing, which is a pseudo-slasher, but not really in the force that we're going to see in 84. So in 84, which is actually kind of late in the game, the explosion of slashers was 80, and then they kind of hit their heyday between 80 and 83. 84 is a little bit late, but he has a couple tricks up his sleeve to keep it interesting, and that is heavy supernatural elements, over-the-top gore, a little bit of a humor aspect, and he actually finally has a pretty good budget.
Yeah, and explicit supernatural. Because Michael Myers and Jason have sort of a subcurrent of supernatural to them.
It's not till the later movies that they're inherently supernatural.
Right, and there's this psychoanalytic aspect in slasher we've been discussing because they're about anima animus, because they're about sex and death, because they're about puberty equals death, adolescence equals death, and virginity loss equals death. What is more psychoanalytic than dreams? H.P. Lovecraft had explored this idea in his fiction, particularly stories like Beyond the Wall of Sleep, that dreams are actually another world, that they actually represent other dimensions. And this lore gets folded into the Nightmare on Elm Street series. But importantly, we return to suburbia. We're with a couple of kids, Tina and Glenn and Nancy, our final girl. And these kids are all having the same nightmares. It's a very cool, slow reveal that they realize that they're all dreaming about a scary man with a burned face, with knives for fingers, in a red and green sweater and a fedora hat.
Right. So we've returned to the suburban setting a lot like Halloween. This starts to feel more like Halloween in that we actually, in this movie, we see their high school lives are explored more, and it becomes very much about teenagers again. And that's because Wes Craven got the idea after reading an article about teenagers who were dying in their sleeps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was a bunch of teenagers who were waking up screaming and then would fall dead.
Yeah.
And he expanded on that idea by creating a dream demon. Now, there is sort of a mystery to this one because Freddy Krueger was a real guy. She finds his hat in a dream. She sees his name is Freddy Krueger. She confronts her mom, and her mom finally reveals, yeah, honey, there was a guy named Freddy Krueger. He was a child molester and a child murderer. He got off on a technicality, Reagan-era America, right?
Well, I think that was supposed to be like the 70s.
Yeah, well, it's the idea that, like, until the current law...
they weren't tough on crime.
Yeah, we are now. Yeah, those soft on crime people back then. So we got together as a town and burned him alive.
Well, the difference with this, that's of course, the past trauma that we get in a lot of movies. But the difference with this movie is that the past trauma isn't that bad people cause the death of an innocent like it is in most horror movies. It's that, like, reasonable people murdered a monster.
Right.
And the monster just won't stay dead.
Yeah, it's more about, I would say, kind of this Reagan idea of like crime invades you. The crime invades the suburbs. I mean, the title A Nightmare on Elm Street. A lot of towns, a lot of suburbs have a street.
Every
called Elm Street.
town has Elm Street.
It's like a nightmare on Main Street.
Right. It's the idea
be.
of the nightmare is in your backyard.
Right. And so the idea is that this suburb decides they'll do anything they can to protect their children, and they murder a child murderer. And then he gets their children in their dreams.
Mm-hmm. Which, like, what's more invasive than that?
Right.
Not only do they come into the suburbs, not only do they come into the house, but they come into your mind.
And it's definitely sexual that he attacks their children while their children are asleep in bed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's got this sexual aspect. And Nancy's mom starts to think Nancy's delusional, takes her to a sleep clinic. Even when Nancy keeps proving that she's not delusional, her mom sinks deeper and deeper into alcoholism, puts bars on the windows. There's this overprotectiveness, but you can't protect Nancy. In fact, all she's doing is putting Nancy in a cage, you know? And, yeah.
And the other thing that sets this movie apart is that it's really inventive, and this is what kept the series alive for so long, in that it's not just a guy hitting people with a knife. Like Friday the 13th movies get really boring because at the end of the day, it's just Jason cutting people with knives.
Yeah.
And like it's just the same thing over and over again.
Or a pitchfork or a hatchet.
But in Nightmare on Elm Street, it's these inventive dream murders.
Right.
So like in the first movie, we get so many different types of ways of killing somebody. When Johnny Depp gets eaten by his own bed is a famous one.
Sucked in, spit back out in like a blood slurry.
Yeah, and like that's so inventive, and that's also where the paranormal aspect comes and where a sense of mystery comes, where you're like, you don't even know what could have done that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And then at the end, there's this beautiful moment where our final girl, in full living metaphor fashion, says to Freddy,
It's too late, Krueger. I know the secret now. This is just a dream. You're not alive. This whole thing is just a dream. I want my mother and friend again.
What?
I take back every bit of energy I gave you. You're nothing. You're shit.
I don't believe in you. You're nothing. You're shit. And he dissolves. Now, of course, he comes back. But still.
Yeah.
In future Nightmare on Elm Streets, this gimmick would get tired, where it started being about the inventive death to the point of ridiculousness.
Right, and also it stopped being scary,
pizza.
it started being goofy.
He made a pizza of their faces. He fought one.
You are what you eat, bitch.
He fought one with invisible karate. He drowned one in a waterbed. And so on. But Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and 3 are actually pretty good. And Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Back to Sleepaway Camp, is about being gay.
I don't like Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I like Nightmare on Elm Street 3 a lot. I don't really like Nightmare on Elm Street 2 because it stops being about dreams and it becomes about Freddy possessing somebody while they're awake.
Yeah.
And then at the end, Freddy literally comes into the real world, and it kind of destroys the whole dream mythos that was being built up.
Yeah. Just to pop back just a hot second, there's actually a film with Dennis Quaid from a few years earlier called Dreamscape that our dad actually rented for me when he found out I was into Nightmare on Elm Street, and he was like, check this out. And Dreamscape was a film from a few years before Nightmare on Elm Street about a guy who could enter other people's dreams and observe what was going on in their dreams and try to help them with things. And that was a film that also established that if you die in the dream, you die in real life.
And that's been done a couple times. That's very much The Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Right. But that trope about the guy who's special because he can enter other people's dreams is the thing that makes Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, cool, because Patricia Arquette has that power, and she goes to a home for troubled youth and brings them all into the dreams with her so they can fight Freddy together.
Yeah.
Also, that one is the one where they start to invent these really colorful deaths. A girl who watches too much TV gets her head shoved in a TV.
A
kid who...
junkie gets injected with shit.
Yeah, Freddy's fingers turn into needles. The kid in the wheelchair gets put in like a killer wheelchair, etc. So that one's good. And it was so popular that it led to a series of Bad Dream knockoff films. Dream Maniac, Bad Dreams, etc.
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street, one of the greats, redefined the genre and revitalized the genre in 1984 when it was kind of hitting its like midpoint decline. Now, the genre would kind of go on to peter out and decline toward like 87, 80, 89, but there are still some gems out there.
Yeah, and we'll mark we have a point that marks the death of the genre, but it does seem like Nightmare on Elm Street, not only it renewed interest, but it like kind of made studios confident to give slasher movies a budget. So you'll see a couple more, like 78 to 83, those slasher movies are so cheap. And they're and it's about what the filmmakers can do with a small budget. And then in the mid 80s, you get a bit bigger budget slasher movies when you talk about like Funhouse or Hell Night. And that renewed interest would last until 1988, when a little movie came out called Child's Play. And for Nick and I, we kind of used that movie as the marker for the death of slasher
That's
films.
when it ends. Not to say Child's Play isn't good in its own right, but we've completely lost track of our origins at that point.
Now it's a killer doll movie attacking a family, and it is still considered by people to be a slasher movie.
Sure.
And that's where, like, punk music becomes new wave. That's where you have the end of an era and the beginning of a new era, I suppose.
Yeah. So 88 is the death. Now, we say this episode's through 89 because there's a few movies from 89 that are still good. Last cries of the genre.
Yeah, totally. I'm not saying that any of it's bad. I'm just saying that is the end of this period of American horror films.
Child's Play is also going to fit into a category of what we call, we're going to discuss this in the next chapter, in the last chapter, disavowals. Films that are counted often as slashers, but that we don't really consider slashers.
Right. Child's Play, I would not consider a slasher movie.
It follows the slasher format, but it's a killer doll movie, which is its own category, meriting its own episode.
Yeah.
So let's move on. Let's take a deep breath, Harry. We did it. We came to the end of marking this in a historical sense. We started with the Iliad. We ended with Child's Play. That's the journey. But we have not exhaustively covered all the slashers we've seen, which leads us into just kind of a catch-all chapter that I think is the most useful chapter of this entire episode.
Right, so why don't we end things up with Chapter 4, The Good, the Bad, and the Okay.
If ever there was a chapter that it'd be good for you to follow along at home with, this is the one. You go to cinematicoblivion.com, you click on the show notes, and we've got this nice table of all the films we're going to mention. And we are just going to mention these. We're going to run through them. We're not going to spend too long on any one of them. We're going to try to give you as many recommendations of what to watch and what not to watch and what maybe to watch as we can. So you don't have to follow along on the website. Films we're discussing. Once again, cinematicoblivion.com, show notes, slashers, episode 3.
Right, and these aren't just movies we've watched in preparation for this episode. These are the ones we've watched over years. And as Nick said at the beginning, this has been a lifetime and a many, many year-long endeavor to try to chronicle the history of slasher movies.
Yes. So, there's this nice table. It goes across in 4 columns and hella rows. Bad, okay, good, great. So we've categorized them by quality, and then from top down, it's chronological, but we're going to skip around in chronology a little bit because we're going to go from column to column. First, let's talk about, let me just list them off, top tier, the best slasher films in existence, the ones you gotta see if you're gonna see any, the great column.
And luckily we've already talked about all these movies, so we can just give you the names and you can revert back to what we've already said about them. But the first one is Black Christmas from 1974.
The second one is Alice, Sweet Alice from 1976.
And of course Halloween, 78.
Just Before Dawn from 81.
And Sleepaway Camp, which you just heard us talk about, as well as The Final Terror, both from 1983.
A Nightmare on Elm Street from 84, which we discussed in Chapter 3.
And I feel like we should do a whole episode at some point on Slumber Party Massacre 2.
Really, it does merit its own episode. It's incredible. The Slumber Party Massacre, the original, we'll get to, is in the OK column. The sequel, Slumber Party Massacre 2, takes the living metaphor to the next level, blows it up, turns it into this just incredible film where this girl who's traumatized from the first film has dreams of a rock star with a drill guitar who's like, baby, baby. He's like,
but the Elvis. Drill is also his penis.
Right, of course. And her sister in the insane asylum keeps saying to her, don't go all the way.
Yeah.
As she goes on this sexual weekend with her boyfriend. And then, like Nightmare on Elm Street, this killer bursts from her dream. But he's no one specific. He's just her sexuality.
And the way it's done with this rock character, and there's like a music video sequence, it's very, like, I almost want to call it avant-garde. It's a very ballsy, artistic approach to slasher films. It might seem to some on the surface as just goofy and stupid, but I find it really interesting and cool.
It was directed by a woman and written by a woman who, made it with feminism on her mind, as was the first and third Slumber Party Massacre film. And I feel like that reads. It has this kind of critical feminist theory.
Well, the first movie, it doesn't.
Well, the first movie was more of a satire. We'll get to that later. But this one has this, critical feminist theory theme going of the living violent sexuality bursting from the dream of this young girl, you know? And additionally, as you said, a lot of people say, like, so bad it's good. Fuck you. It's good.
It's a good movie.
It's great, actually. You know? I'm so sick of people who feel like they have to qualify liking slasher films. These films are great.
Now it's time for the fun part.
I love to jam it to the floor, let me twice pipes roar. Well, I'm an inch off the ground, the speakers all around.
There's nothing you have to apologize for. So that's the great column.
Yeah, and we'll definitely, I do want to talk more about Slumber Party Massacre 2, because there's a lot to be said about that movie.
It deserves a serious unpacking. So, yeah, those are the greats. Those are the top tiers. Now we're going to pop around from good to bad to okay, alternating as we go.
Yeah.
Harry, why don't you start with the first good movie?
The first good movie is a movie called Tourist Trap from 1979.
Every year, hundreds of young people travel the country and disappear. God help those who get caught in the tourist trap. Tourist trap, where beautiful young people looking for excitement are tricked.
Another one where the supernatural element is very upfront and blatant, but that keeps it interesting. It's about these teenagers who go out into the woods and get killed off by living mannequins.
Yeah. We talked about this in a classic episode a long time ago. This is another one of Stephen King's favorites. It's really good.
Yeah, it's excellent. It gets all the plot points done well. The mannequins are creepy. The killer has a really cool, interesting backstory. Good final girl.
Good depiction and very absurd and over the top. And I mean, a good portrayal of the killer by the actor.
Yeah, it's very well done. It's excellent. You guys should all see it.
So a bad slasher film from 1980 is He Knows You're Alone, a shitty Halloween clone with nothing really going for it except for a young Tom Hanks, in which a woman who is on the verge of getting married tells the entire town she's just not sure if she's willing to get married, and her friends get murdered off by another guy who got jilted on his wedding night.
He knows who you are. He knows where you live. He knows you're alone. He knows you're alone.
I remember this film so little that I have very little memory of seeing. This is one of them. I just remember that she constantly is saying to strangers, "I'm hesitant about my marriage."
Yeah. And then at the end, her jilted lover is implied to be becoming the new generation of killer. This movie has no idea what it's trying to do or what it's trying to say. It apes on Halloween for the pure bucks of it, and it even has a theme song that sounds exactly like the Halloween theme song. So, not very good. Actually, bad.
Yeah, that one's bad. One that's just okay is Rituals from 1977. Cheap Deliverance clone with a one-by-one killer and like a, grotesque woodsy monster at the end.
Right. Now, we already mentioned how good Friday the 13th, the original from 1980 is. So go back to chapter 2 if you want to hear about that. That's a good one, Friday the 13th.
Yeah. A bad one that only I watched is To All a Good Night, which I actually do want to talk about for a second because it has one very important quality. I will say it's a very bad movie. It is stunningly incompetent. The pacing, the way it's shot, it opens with no context, just these girls chasing another girl through a sorority house. One of them is literally chanting sorority. She's going, sorority, sorority. And this is and then they chase her up to the balcony and she falls off and dies. That happens. She hits the ground at literally the 60-second mark. It is so rushed. There is no establishment. And of course, that's our past trauma. And then we get a pretty basic Black Christmas ripoff with a killer in a Santa costume stalking people through a sorority house. It does have a really cool theme song, though, so that is one redeeming quality. but like you are immediately struck with how amateur it is and how low the budget is, which is surprising because it's directed by David Hess, star of Last House on the Left. He plays the maniac killer in that movie. So you would think if he's worked with Wes Craven and been on film sets, he would understand things like coverage and sound quality, but clearly not, because this movie's a mess. The opening scene has the first murder, a knife just comes in from off screen and stabs him in the chest. Anyway, none of that's important. It's bad, but the thing that makes it interesting is the twist reveal is that the killer is the mother of the woman who died at the beginning, come back for revenge. Now, this movie came out in 1980, but it was released on January 30th, 5 months before Friday the 13th, which was released on May 9th.
Oh, Killer Mom.
So this movie actually did the Killer Mom before Friday the 13th, but clearly, since it's only 5 months, it's not a ripoff. No. They were both in production at the same time. It's just parallel thinking, but it is interesting that they beat them to the punch on that one.
Yeah.
But then it also turns out that there are two killers, and it's also the dad, so not quite.
Right. And the mother aspect comes from Psycho always. Mm-hmm. Okay, an okay slasher film from 1980 that you might have heard of is Prom Night with Jamie Lee Curtis. This was very shortly after the success of Halloween, and Jamie Lee Curtis had become a token scream queen.
There's a special night in the lives of all of us. A night to be beautiful, to be desirable. A night we can break all the rules and make our own. Prom Night. Everyone at Hamilton High is getting ready for prom night. It's a day of rehearsals, arrangements, final preparations, and last-minute phone calls.
Nick? Wendy, do you still like to play games?
They're too old for games.
We'll talk about her more later in other films. Prom Night is mentioned a lot in the canon along with Halloween and Friday the 13th. It's not super memorable or good. The killer is not very iconic and the kill scenes are not very iconic, but it does have the cool past trauma opening of a bunch of kids playing a game in an abandoned building and they accidentally push a girl out the window and she falls to her death. Then, when all these same kids have grown up and are about to go to prom night, a very disco prom night I might add, with some very disco music, which the movie's known for, all of Jamie Lee Curtis's friends are getting killed. Jamie Lee Curtis is the grown-up sister of the girl who died in the beginning. The killer kills in a ski mask and just with a knife. And what I remember is when I was young and super into all these movies and renting Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Halloween, etc., I rented this one with the bunch. And on VHS, back in our mom and dad's bedroom, I couldn't see a fucking thing. And even finally, when there was a kill scene in the light, the killer reaches out and flips off the light and you can't see anything. I mean, you can't see anything.
That's because you watched it on VHS.
Well,
I bet if you saw it on DVD, it would look better. VHS does that.
Generations of people saw it the way I saw it.
Yeah.
Okay? It's pretty basic, but it was popular at the time, and it really rode the wave right on time. It was early, very early slasher film. So, Prom Night, just okay.
Well, the following year...
Oh, by the way, the killer is, spoiler alert, her brother.
No, fantastic. The following year, you have a good one with Friday the 13th Part 2, which we already talked about, and you also have a bad one with Graduation Day, which I was just going to introduce because I remember absolutely nothing about that movie, so why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, a bad one is Graduation Day, in which a girl dies on the track team because the coach pushed her too hard, and a few years later people start dying, and it's obviously related to this trauma. But I think the thing that was it had kind of a good twist. It was like her secret boyfriend or something.
The only thing I remember about it is that everyone keeps saying it's their graduation day.
Yeah, and they never actually have graduation day in the entire movie. And there's like a 20-minute sequence in the middle of the film that completely loses us, where it's just the principal in his office fielding calls from parents being like, I don't know where your kid went. Stop asking me. And then his phone rings again. I don't know where your kid is. Don't ask me. And they never even, like, you really want a film called Graduation Day to end with like they all are in their, mortarboards and their cloaks and there's
it should be somebody's killing them on graduation. It's not at all leads up to graduation.
And pomp and circumstances playing and all that. that never happens. It's just a bunch of shitty sequences in the woods around a high school, you know,
Yeah.
and some really terrible improvised dialogue in the locker rooms.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That was great.
And a terrible fake out with a drunk, abusive stepdad.
Yeah.
Bad
You
movie. Somehow financially successful. One of the more financially successful slashers of the time.
So one that I actually also didn't see, but you put in the okay column was Funhouse.
I guess I gotta take this one. The Funhouse is actually pretty good, but I had a really bad first impression of it because I watched it hoping that it would be clown horror.
Because that's the cover.
There's a clown on the cover, and there's no killer clown in this movie. But upon revisiting it, it's Tobe Hooper. It's from Texas Chainsaw. Much of the film is not a slasher. It's just kind of a teen date movie, which is kind of cute. And it's sort of this cute, just kind of creepy, budding sexuality teen date movie. And then it turns into a slasher in like the third act.
That tonight will turn the funhouse into a carnival of terror.
Yeah.
And it's actually a pretty good slasher. I had to get over that it wasn't clown horror, and that's the only reason I said it was just okay.
Well,
but it's actually okay.
From what I've seen of it, it has one of the highest budgets and highest production values of any of these movies. Especially
Right.
for 81. It looks really great. It has that giallo lighting.
It's kind of classy in that way. Yeah. So that's an okay one.
Another good one from the same year is The Burning, which we already talked about. And another bad one from the same year, 1981, is Happy Birthday to Me.
Someone's having a party for the top 10, the senior class snobs. Before they get to celebrate, 6 of them will die in the most bizarre ways you'll ever see.
This movie's quite a bit of a mess. It has a classic setup, which is that like these kids at this elite private high school start getting killed off. But they didn't write an ending when they started filming the movie, so they just like kind of cobbled together this weird ending where it's like a girl was dressing up as another girl.
Oh, it's so
such a
soap
mess.
opera.
And they also have this setup where it's like this thing that the teens do is they jump this bridge, and like it's a toll bridge and
drawbridge.
A drawbridge, and they jump it with their cars while it's going up, and they establish that in the first act. Then it comes up again in the second act, and then it never pays off or is brought up again.
Yeah,
and it's like what this movie is. It's just another thing where it feels like an Italian movie. It's not. It's American, but it feels like a giallo where it wasn't thought through and it doesn't have a comprehensive script.
Right. The ending is like so Days of Our Lives. Like, I was wearing a fake face to pretend to be you because your father impregnated my mother. It's like, who gives
and it's
a
like,
shit?
It's like 5 minutes of ongoing explanation.
Right. Giallo style. I want to note, though, that this is the only legit birthday slasher, even though a far better film...
Not far better.
Oh, a far better film. I'm saying far better film
is
that
Bloody
I actually
Birthday.
really like is Bloody Birthday, which we're not actually counting as a slasher because it's more of a killer kid movie,
Yeah.
like The Bad Seed. But it also had a cover of like a hand lit with
a
flames,
butcher's knife.
with a butcher's knife on a cake. Bloody Birthday is not a legit birthday movie, nor is it a slasher, but it's much better than this. But Happy Birthday to Me was at least the one legit birthday slasher.
Well, Happy Birthday to Me also has one element where these kids hang out because they're all the top in their class, and there's a part where they're like, why do we have to hang out with Greg or whatever his name is? And they're like, well, we have to. He's in the top 10 of our class. And it's like, why do you just don't do that? Why do you have that rule?
Harry, you don't understand.
I've never been to an elite East Coast private school.
So an okay slasher from the same year is Night School. I go to Night School, and let me tell you, it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary mostly how fucking loud everyone is after 7 p.m., and nobody else seems to care as much as I do about getting home before
They're
10.
too busy doing their headhunter rituals.
When darkness descends on the city, something happens to the girls who attend night school.
You're not walking home alone tonight, are you? After what happened? We'll be all right.
So this one has a very giallo feel to it.
Yeah.
But it's cool. It's a professor of anthropology who studies like headhunters, right?
Right, and he's having affairs with all of his students. And
yeah, he's a pervy old dude. Actually, everyone at the school is pervy because a female teacher then says, don't be with him, he's a pervert, and then she also seduces the girl.
And the murders are being done in a similar way. It's a They're not wearing a good mask. They're wearing just like a motorcycle mask and killing people with a machete. But there is evidence of like headhunting rituals.
Yeah, it's based on this old practice that this professor is studying of ancient tribal headhunting rituals. And it has a very giallo feel in that it kind of feels like a Sergio Martino film.
Well, the thing that is a bummer about the movie is that it becomes, and we've talked about this before, it becomes just a crime investigation movie. It focuses on the cops too much, and something we've always said is a slasher movie falls off when they introduce the cops.
It's true. That's why this film's just okay. But it's not bad, which is why it's okay. And at the end, we're spoiling all these movies. Should we just leave this one to the mystery?
It's fine. Yeah, you don't need to spoil the end. All you need to know is that what do you think I am? Some kind of headhunter?
Am I a headhunter? Great fake out.
Night School.
Okay, another good one is Hell Night. I think it's pretty good. It's very standard, but this starts coming up, and we'll see this again with other movies, which is the real thing that sets these slashers apart is just coming up with a good, interesting setting. Where can you go to have these kills take place? So another one that does that nicely is Hell Night, where it's a sorority ritual where they have to spend Halloween night in an old haunted house where, I forget the name of the monster character.
It's some dude.
Yeah, but there's an urban legend about like a deformed person who grew up in that house and still roams the grounds.
In order to be a member of Alpha Sigma Rho, one has to do what? To stay in Garth Manor one night. And why is this night so special?
Because 12 years ago, Raymond Garth murdered his family here and then committed suicide.
Now, when the police arrived, they discovered a note written by Raymond Garth describing the entire gruesome act. But strangely, they only discovered 3 dead bodies. Andrew is still believed by some to be living somewhere within this house.
And they show up, and guess what? The urban legend is true.
It just is that.
Yeah, there's not really much of a mystery.
Like Madman.
Like Madman.
But it's well done. This is a good movie.
Yeah, this is much better than Madman. And it just is a standard, well-done, well-made slasher with Linda Blair as our final girl.
From The Exorcist, yeah. And she's a good final girl. I like the colors and the costumes and the...
It has high production value.
Yeah, exactly. An okay slasher from 81. 81 saw a lot.
Yeah, 81 was the #1 year.
Yeah, they were just popping out. Final Exam. I really like the poster to this film. I'm a teacher, and I want to put this up into my classroom, which is like, the tagline is, "Some will pass the test, God save the rest," or something like that.
At Lanier College, they have the finest security, the best teacher-student relations, no fraternity hazing, strictly enforced curfews,
What was that?
and a killer. He's come back. Final Exam.
It's kind of a Halloween knockoff. This film is notable. Anytime you read about it, you will see that it is notable for it spends a long time introducing the characters and no time at all explaining or revealing the killer. The killer is completely arbitrary and never explained.
That's kind of cool.
It's minimalist, kind of like Madman, but like really minimalist, where it spends a long time like, we got all these characters on campus. We got the coach, we got the jock, we got the nerd who's obsessed with murder, who's I guess a red herring.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the girl who's a girlfriend of the frat guy. Scream 2 stole it. Did you ever see Scream 2?
No.
So in Scream 2, there's a scene where this frat guy has these letters in a bracelet that he's not supposed to give away, but if you give them to a girl, it shows you really care. He gives them to the girl, the frat finds out, and they like tie him to a tree and then leave him overnight as like a hazing for giving his letters away, and then he's murdered there. That happens in Final Exam.
Okay.
They stole that directly. At the end, the killer stalks her through the building. He's not even masked. You just see his face. He's just some guy.
Mm-hmm.
She defeats him. Credits roll. You have no idea who he is or why this even happened. They never go into it. But the execution is fine.
Yeah.
So it's an okay slasher. It's incredibly minimal. Yeah.
Another okay one from 1981 is Terror Train, which really does the trope I was just talking about of finding an interesting setting. So this one is Kids on a Train.
For the students aboard, it's going to be the one party to end them all.
They're always walking out of my parties. But this time, you can't.
It's a sorority, or rather a medical school fraternity ritual, where Halloween they get on a train in costume. And this is the thing where the killer is killing people off and then switching costumes, so you never know who the killer is. They're always a different person, posing as a different person. Jamie Lee Curtis again. This one's pretty good. It has an over-the-top magic element, and I don't mean like magical. I mean like magician, like stage magician magic. They hire David Copperfield, and he plays himself, to come on the train and perform for them. And then like it turns out that the killer is using stage magic, so that element is kind of just patched on. David Copperfield gets stabbed in the neck with the sword, so that's pretty cool.
Talk about how you saw this movie.
Oh yeah, I was on an overnight train from Rhode Island to New York. And I was like, well, obviously I need to watch a train movie. Oh, yeah. So I watched Terror because they had Wi-Fi on the train. I watched Terror Train online.
We like to get ourselves really spooked.
I have to be, you got to keep it topical.
I bet the train ride that night for you was not nearly as exciting as the train ride.
No, I was just kind of sitting in my seat on my computer the whole time.
Was anyone partying? Was there stage magic?
No, No, David Copperfield didn't show up, unfortunately.
Should we stick with 81 or should we just skip around the columns?
Let's stick with 81 and say that the other really good slasher of that year is Halloween 2.
There's plenty of other good slashers that year. It goes on. There's more good ones. But Halloween 2, go ahead.
Yeah, Halloween 2, which like we're not going to talk about much. It's just Halloween 2. It's really good. It's John Carpenter again. It's Jamie Lee Curtis again, and it's successful.
I shot him 6 times. I shot him in the heart. This man, he's not human.
Universal Pictures presents Halloween 2. More of the night he came home.
It picks up. The movie comes out, 3 years after Halloween, but it picks up a minute after the film ended. We continue on that same Halloween night in Haddonfield. Michael is stalking again, killing again.
Yeah, it picks up, 10 minutes after the
killing
first movie
more
ended.
young women. And then Jamie Lee Curtis has been rushed to the hospital where Michael seeks her down. And that's where it becomes iconic and for being the hospital slasher.
Right, and again, good setting. Finding an interesting setting to have your horror movie in.
A night shift at a hospital. I've told my nurse friend, Krista, she's got to check that movie out. She's got to see it as a nurse. Yeah. You want to really freak yourself out about your job. Mm-hmm. There's some good deaths. It feels less like the original Halloween because at this point it's like building on the tropes.
There's a much higher body count.
And it's more, it's less tonal. It's not directed by John Carpenter. So
it's not?
No, it's not directed by John Carpenter. Sorry if you said that earlier. Yeah. But it was written by him and he signed off on it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have that exact same John Carpenter feel, but it's still picking up on all those things. And the hospital setting's really good. And it very distinctly seems like it was meant to kind of end the Michael Myers story.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately,
they dipped into it again with Halloween 3. Wait, not unfortunately, because I'll get to it, but Halloween 4 and 5 are not bad.
Okay, let's just finish off 81, because 81 is the prime year. We had 3 other very good ones. We had The Prowler, which I love. I think that movie's excellent.
Go ahead and talk about it.
The Prowler, otherwise known as Rosemary's Killer, is a great high school dance
Tom
slasher.
Savini's back again.
Tom Savini's back, and I think he's doing some of his best work. Some of the kills in that movie are top-notch.
The Prowler. No! Just when you catch your breath, it starts all over again. You may think you're safe, but you're dead wrong. The Prowler, coming soon.
It's a little bit of a sleepy movie, but we've got a good sandy blonde final girl, which it's minimal, and we've got the thing we talked about earlier with like the people back from Vietnam being a theme of films of the 80s. This is about a traumatized veteran of World War II whose costume is the gas mask.
Gas mask and like jumpsuit.
Yeah.
It's effective. I think it's excellent. And I don't find it sleepy. I find it like does good suspense. I think it does good tension.
Well, it's a good one. Definitely a good one. And Tom Savini once again embraced the Carrie scare ending where a corpse reaches out in the last scene.
Yeah. Another good one from that year is My Bloody Valentine.
In this town on Valentine's Day, everybody loses their heart.
Roses are red, violets are blue. One is dead, and so are you.
It can't be.
Yeah, this is as Canadian as they come. It's similar to the Prowler in that we've got a guy in a coal mining outfit with a coal
similar gas mask.
Yeah, and someone in the history murdered everyone on Valentine's Day and doesn't want there to be a dance. The same exact plot as the Prowler.
Yeah,
actually.
it's about a high school dance.
And roses are red, violets are blue. One is dead, and now are you, or something like that. And at the end, there's sort of a mystery reveal that it's not the original killer. It's someone who witnessed the original murders.
No, it's the son of the original killer.
Who witnessed the original murders.
Yeah.
So to be clear, the killer was a guy who witnessed Harry Warden kill his dad and then became traumatized into becoming the killer.
Whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Lastly, in 81, we have another good one, The Dorm That Dripped Blood.
It's time for a crash course in terror at The Dorm That Dripped Blood.
Great.
By the way, we're counting Canadian ones with the My Bloody Valentine. This is an American genre. We're not counting Spanish or Italian ones, but we are counting anything from North America.
Well, the Canadians are also trying to pretend. My Bloody Valentine, not so much, but a lot of other Canadian movies are trying to pretend that they take place in the U.S.
Yeah, not My Bloody Valentine. That's clearly Canada. Yeah. I guess we're not including Mexican slashers because that's its own genre as well. But The Dorm That Dripped Blood, one of the few to make it onto the Video Nasty list. Really good. A group of college kids tasked with the job of tearing down and taking off all the parts of a condemned dorm. And while they do so, they are massacred repeatedly by a psycho killer. I won't spoil the ending, just to say that even though we have an incredibly cogent, clever, active final girl, I'm going to spoil this one thing. She doesn't win. She doesn't make it. This is one of the few where the killer wins brutally and cynically, and it just ends.
Yeah.
And it's dark as fuck. And it's good. I like this one. The Dorm That Dripped Blood. Recommended.
Yeah. Well, the following year we get the OK movie Slumber Party Massacre.
Yeah, the Slumber Party Massacre.
Right, which is just what it sounds like. High school girls have a slumber party, and somebody drills them with a drill.
The basketball team is planning a party. A slumber party.
Yes. We already mentioned 82. Also, the first slasher to come out that year was a bad one, Madman, which we talked about in Chapter 2, The Legend of Madman Mars, etc.
We also have a movie that I don't super remember. This is another one that I watched, and I don't really remember, which is Girls' Night Out. All I remember is that the killer is wearing a bear costume.
Yeah. It's okay. This one's just okay. It has the most cringeworthy, annoying, funny guys ever.
Right, the funny guy is a really obnoxious trope in a lot of these. My Bloody Valentine has a bad one. Friday the 13th has a bad one.
Yeah.
But these two are the most unwatchable.
And the people around them think they're actually funny.
Well, they were clearly supposed to. The audience was supposed to find them charming, but they're just awful.
They're just you can't wait to see them die. Girls' Night Out, just okay.
You know what really turns me on? I love to be scared. But lately, things are getting weird.
I don't want to be here. I want to go home right now. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here.
No one has seen Cheney. But what can you expect on a girls' night out?
I guess at this point we're going chronologically, so let's just keep going chronologically. Another okay one. This one almost doesn't count as a slasher. Maybe I should take it out of the chart.
What, the Friday the 13th Part 3?
No, Alone in the Dark.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it on the chart, but it's up for debate. Alone in the Dark is about a series of escaped mental patients who massacre a house. It's more of a massacre.
It's kind of a siege movie.
Film. It fit in with the slasher genre at the time, and there's one mystery aspect in that one of the madmen, you don't see his face, and then later on he's revealed to be hiding among the people in the house, and you didn't know it was him.
Anything can happen when you're alone in the dark.
This one's got a good cast, though, and then it's got
Donald Pleasance,
Jack Palance, and some other interesting...
Martin Landau.
Yeah. And so it's actually pretty good. Not to be confused with the Uwe Ball film called Alone in the Dark.
Right, with Christian Slater.
So Alone in the Dark from 82, pretty good. Also later in 82, we already mentioned it, Friday the 13th Part 3.
Which I haven't actually seen.
It's in 3D, brah.
Yeah.
It's where he first puts on the hockey mask. It's just okay.
Yeah.
That's
another one that you put in the bad column. I didn't actually see it. Was Mortuary from 1983.
Yeah, we're moving on to 83 now. Mortuary, much like Joe Pantoliano, had his career pop off with The Final Terror in '83. Bill Paxton had his career pop off with Mortuary, which combines elements of Satanism with the cover has a hand coming out of the ground like it's a zombie movie.
Before your funeral and your coffin lid is closed, before you are buried and your flesh turns cold, before you are covered with the last shovelful of dirt, be sure you are really dead.
Not at all. Bill Paxton is a kid who runs a mortuary. People are dying in what seems like some sort of satanic cult. In like the second scene of this film, someone gets murdered in a warehouse in like the cheapest setting ever, and then they say, let's stop by the roller disco. And I remember saying aloud, if this whole film takes place at a roller disco, I will be happy. We stay there for about 2 seconds.
Aww.
And then we're gone.
That would have been a cool roller disco murder movie.
No one's made that film yet, and it needs to be made.
Yeah.
Anyway, it just ends up being about a guy who's a mortician's son. Spoiler alert, Bill Paxton's the killer. He's fine as the killer. He likes to embalm bodies because he misses his mom. And we've got kind of a cool, like, meta ending where he's lined them all up in tableau style, and he's talking to them. And the final girl is, like, you know, trying her best to survive. And then suddenly his mom, who's been dead for years, who's kept as an embalmed, of course, like Norman Bates, springs to life, and it freeze frames.
That's cool.
But everything before that sucks.
Yeah.
So this film counts as a bad film.
Another bad one from that year is Scalps, which you already talked about. But a good one from that year is Curtains.
What waits behind the curtains is exciting, frightening, sensual, terrifying, and bizarre. Curtains reveal what you expect and what you don't.
Yeah.
This is another Canadian one from 1983.
I tried to push this one under the great column, and Harry said it's just short of great.
I don't think it's great, but it's really good. It has these great opening title card, and it has these great curtain transitions throughout the movie. It's just about a director brings these 6 actresses to his like faraway cottage mansion to have them audition for this important role, and they start getting killed off one by one.
He really makes them compete for his favor in order to do this.
And it's actually pretty apt, what with all this
Harvey Weinstein
Hollywood sleazery coming out.
Right.
And it involves this doll. There's a creepy doll that's at the murder scenes, and it's just really visually interesting. It has
great mask.
Great mask, old lady mask. Really great ice skating chase scene. Just good movie all around.
So, 83 Curtains. I love the ice skating kill scene. Another good one from 83 was The House on Sorority Row.
A certain kind of girl joins Pi Theta sorority. A girl who likes to party and likes to get close to her friends. A girl whose extracurricular activities were more daring than most. A girl who could turn her fantasies into reality.
One more fling won't set us back any.
They decided to make real sure that no one would ever forget the girls in the house on Sorority Row.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of sorority horror films, slasher films. The original slasher film is a sorority film, Black Christmas. There's another one, Sorority Massacre, which we didn't watch. It's a common setting, and to all good night.
To all
also
good nights.
Sorority setting. This is the after Black Christmas, this is the best later 80s or early 80s, but like later slasher era sorority horror film. It's got a good plot of like the house mother has her strange son living in the attic.
Well, you don't find that out till later.
Yeah, but there's some really good reveals of him in a clown outfit.
Yeah, there's a great Hitchcockian sequence where she's seeing the people who've already been killed appear in front of her.
Yeah, it's quite well stylized and well done in that respect. So, I recommend The House on Sorority Row. I do. It's also a little convoluted in the way it's set up. They all decide to play a prank on the house mom.
Prank gone wrong.
Goes too far. They remade this one.
With Carrie Fisher.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. So skipping around now, let's just like knock a few out.
We don't need to talk about the Friday the 13th sequels too
I just
long.
want to mention them real quick. An okay one is Friday the 13th, the final chapter with Crispin Glover and Corey Feldman from 84. Although Siskel and Ebert didn't like it too much. A really bad one is Friday the 13th, A New Beginning from 85, in which they decided to revamp the series, but without any longevity. They have Jason come back, and then at the end, to explain how he could have come back when he died in the fourth one, is that it's a copycat killer. What's the fucking point of that? Then in 86, we get Jason Lives, where they finally explicitly introduced the zombie element. Jason is reanimated like a Frankenstein monster. And then later in 88, he's the New Blood. He fights a girl with telekinesis. You saw that one.
That's the good one.
That's the good one. And then in 89, he takes Manhattan, but it's more like he takes a boat ride. And we'll just stop it there.
Yeah, that's all you need to know.
That's all you really need to know. Another one, though, in the world of sequels is that in 85, we get Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Which we already talked about.
In 87, Dream Warriors. And then some really bad ones in 88 and 89 with The Dream Master. And actually, I think
that's already at the end of the slasher era.
And I think in 89, actually, The Dream Child is interesting. But I'm not even going to talk about Freddy's Dead.
Yeah.
But why don't you talk about an okay slasher from 86?
I never watched
You never
the
even
whole
saw
thing.
it?
I saw the first half of it.
Okay, I'll just briefly mention that April Fool's Day from 86 is notable for being the only notable slasher film of the 80s in which no one dies.
It was all a prank.
The twist at the end is that no one was actually killed.
April Fool's Day. Get ready to party till you drop. Rated R.
So this is actually a completely benign slasher
Well,
film.
we'll see that done again in the next year with a really bad movie called Return to Horror High.
Harry hated this movie more than me.
Oh my god, it's so bad. It's 87. It's very much trying to be like satirical and self-aware, but it falls so flat on every element. There's like attempts at comedy with this cop who's like sexually turned on by blood, and this really convoluted element where they're filming a movie and we're seeing what they're filming as a flashback. It's just a fucking mess, and there are these moments where where like one of the female actresses is like, this movie's offensive, this rape scene is exploitative, and it gets in this long argument with the director, and it's unclear if the movie is trying to make a commentary on the feminist critique of the time.
Yeah, and then it also has the producer who's like, whatever gets them in the seats, I'll put it on the screen.
But it's completely unclear what side the movie's taking. It's like they're showing the feminists in like, they're sympathizing with them, but then they're also criticizing. It's like, what is your point, movie?
Yeah.
And then like it really falls apart at the end when it's revealed that the one black character was actually a white guy wearing like a mask, a black-eyed mask, and our hero yells,
like, happy
Castleman,
birthday to me.
you honky!
Yeah.
And that's his like fun quip as he's fighting him.
Yeah.
But the movie has some of the most incomprehensible dialogue I've ever seen in a horror movie.
And then there's like a fake out that we all faked our deaths because that guy was the killer.
But like some scenes, I was throwing my hands up on what the things that the people are saying to each other in this movie is insane.
What do you do with your newfound fame?
I'm gonna do some of them pussy films.
Pornos? Just so what? That's why.
Got 10 inches strapped to the leg right here. Just ran to go. Been mopping floors too long. Too long, Stevie. Too long.
Yeah.
So that movie sucks.
Worth noting that by 87, movies like Return to Horror High were already kind of playing a commentary that was trying to be sort of a parody or a satire of slasher films. So it was already a genre that people felt like they could kind of satire and ape on, which is the same thing that a comedy back in 81 called Student Bodies tried to do, which looks terrible. And also, the original Slumber Party Massacre was originally written as a horror comedy called Sleepless Nights that was then just bought and played straight.
But 87's not too late because you can also make a good movie like Blood Rage.
Yeah, Blood Rage.
Looks like you're gonna get a chance to meet the rest of the family. My psychotic brother just escaped.
Hot bread, everybody.
Here's to the new family.
You could argue Blood Rage is more of a psycho study, which are the films we're going to disavow.
Yeah.
So it opens with two twins. Mother is hooking up with a boyfriend in the car, and the twins sneak off, commit murder. One of the twins commits murders and frames his twin brother for it. The twin brother then spends the rest of his life in an insane asylum, while the murderous twin gets to live free.
Yeah, so this kind of doesn't meet our criteria because I guess the mother is the real protagonist of the movie.
And also the twin who's been falsely accused.
Yeah, but
and so in that sense, it's kind of more of a thriller.
But this movie heavily follows the killer. The killer's
Right.
a main character. It's not a mystery at all.
Yeah, it's kind of a psycho study. But it's holiday themed. It takes place on Thanksgiving. I watched it because it was Thanksgiving and I didn't know what to watch.
It's really good. I really like it.
Yeah, it's in the good category. Blood Rage is good.
There's some weird, funny moments. There's a part where the hysterical mother is on the phone trying to talk to somebody at the insane asylum, and they keep redirecting her to different departments.
The craziness
over-the-top
of the
and
mother
funny.
is great.
Yeah, the whole film has this really kind of darkly comedic, but also like uncanny, scary tone. It's really disturbing.
And he keeps licking blood off his fingers and going, "It's not cranberry sauce." Which is, I mean, Eli Roth did a trailer for Thanksgiving in the Grindhouse movie, remember? With Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. This is an actual Thanksgiving slasher. A real one. And then it has a fantastic ending that I can't describe any other way than like a Greek tragedy.
Yeah.
Where the mother realizes that she's been imprisoning the wrong twin her whole life and that she just killed the twin she loved who was actually the killer. And she in insanity starts screaming this phrase over and over again, and it's just brutal and dark.
Yeah, it's really good.
So we both really like Blood Rage. Closing out the chart, Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers, and Sleepaway Camp 3, Teenage Wasteland are both really bad.
Yeah.
Unwatchably bad. However, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, and Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers from 88 and 89, the same years as the Sleepaway Camp sequels, are both, in my opinion, pretty good. They star Danielle Harris as a niece of Laurie Strode, and she faces a newly escaped Michael with the aid of newly back on the road Dr. Loomis, and it kind of rehashes the old. It's more of the same, but it's what we've come to love, and I really like those movies. I like 4 and 5, okay.
Well, also in 88, your favorite movie of all time, Cheerleader Camp, was released.
So I just want to be clear, Cheerleader Camp I just think is an okay slasher. In fact, there are aspects of it that are really dumb. It's a blending sort of the teen sex comedy with the summer camp slasher. It's from late in the 80s. The only reason I find it significant is it's got a lot of elements of kind of almost Lynchian dream horror, which I really like, and I made a playlist on Spotify, which you can get in the extras section of cinematicoblivion.com, which if you painstakingly sync up the opening of Cheerleader Camp with the beginning of this playlist, and you don't pause and you don't shuffle, they sync up in a sort of dark side of the rainbow way that
Doesn't
I really
that
like.
sound like some no strings attached fun for all of you people out there?
Well, I worked really hard on it, and I think you should give it a shot. So check out the extras section of cinematicoblivion.com. And for all of these films in a nice chart, check out the show notes section of cinematicoblivion.com. We got 2 last films from 89 to talk about.
So Cheerleader Camp came out in 88, which is the same year as Child's Play. That is the end of slashers.
Strictly.
In my mind. These last 2 movies came out the year after the slasher was dead. One of them we'll see does not do anything to revitalize it and is very bad. The other one kind of
its death, really.
is original and interesting, and it's a nice little, you could almost say a swan song.
Sure.
So the bad one, why don't you talk about?
Well, I think that Shocker from 1989 from our boy Wes Craven, who's kind of a hit or miss director. He brought it home so hard in 84 with Nightmare on Elm Street. In 89, he basically does Freddy Krueger, played by Skinner from the X-Files, as a TV demon instead of a dream demon, and it's just stupid and it's way too long.
Yeah, isn't it like an hour 10? I mean 110 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's like 2 hours and 10 minutes. It's so long, and it's trying to make some commentary about TV that was done better by other films like Pleasantville and Stay Tuned and Terror Vision. Yeah, it's Scrooged. This is a bad movie, and it's 89, and it really kind of shows that these slasher tropes have gotten just ridiculous and silly. Even though it's got joyless violence, it's just not the same.
Yeah,
it's bad.
I think a good movie from that year, though, is Intruder.
Good evening, Walnut Lake shoppers.
It's closing time.
The store will be closing in 15 minutes.
But the night crew still has work to do. Because there's one last customer who isn't satisfied.
No, Scream keeps calling her. He's driving us nuts. Leave me alone.
He wants to slash their prices.
Who's there?
He wants to cut their inventory.
You're crazy.
He wants to chop until they all drop.
Intruder takes the slasher setting, and it does the whole idea of over the course of one night in one setting, and that setting is a grocery store the last night that it'll be open before they have to close the store for good. And it's all these teenagers who work in the grocery store and have worked there, for their summer jobs throughout high school, and the owner, and they're doing pricing and doing stock after the store is closed, and they start getting killed off one by one. It has a really good kind of claustrophobic tone, really good pacing, just a really excellent movie all the way. It's not like great. It's not going to, change everyone's life, but it's just pretty solid.
Yeah. So that's the chart. We just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of films that get kind of lumped in with slashers that we know of and have even seen, but made a decision not to talk about. When a Stranger Calls from 79, which is a lot like Black Christmas, feels like more of a psychodrama stalker film like Play Misty for Me or Baby Jane or Fatal Attraction.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about anything that's Italian, even Italian slashers like Stage Fright Aquarius, which is very much a slasher.
And which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Kabuki Masks.
Or movies like Slaughter High, which is British.
Yeah, and Halloween...
Or Pieces, which is Spanish.
Yeah, we're going to do a Spanish slasher film later. Also, I mentioned that we're not getting into Cruising or Windows, and Halloween 3, which we didn't mention on the chart, is not a slasher at all. So
no, it's like a paranormal weird movie.
Season of the Witch. Also, we said we're not doing psychodramas like Night Warning or Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker or Bloody Birthday, Maniac, Don't Go in the House, Terror on Alcatraz,
Driller Killer,
Silent Night, Deadly Night, Nightmares on in a Damaged Brain. These merit their own episode someday. Halloween doesn't count because it spends very little time studying Michael's development and is more about the victims. So it's just films that are all from the killer's perspective. Even though Silent Night, Deadly Night was very controversial and actually marked major protest against slasher films, we don't count it as a part of slasher films.
Yeah.
There was also a British horror comedy called Bloodbath at the House of Death we're not talking about. There were Prom Night sequels that were Carrie knockoffs. There were Texas Chainsaw sequels as well.
Like parodies.
Yeah. And you know what? We genuinely tried to watch every slasher movie.
No, we set out with the goal of watching every proto-slasher and every slasher.
We tried. But you know what? There's a lot of slasher movies we just didn't get to. We did our best. But as we've said, oblivion is a lifelong pursuit. So slashers that we still have to watch include The Silent Scream, New Year's Evil, Home Sweet Home, Visiting Hours, Evil Judgment, Terminal Choice, Terror Night, The Slayer, X-Ray, Death Screams, Superstition, Unhinged, American Nightmare, The Mutilator, The Initiation, Deadly Intruder, Too Scared to Scream.
So once again from us here at Cinematic Oblivion, thank you so much for listening to our 3-part slasher episode. This was a lot of work from Nick and I. We spent years watching these movies, so we hope that we have been insightful and helpful. If you have any questions or recommendations, if you have any movies you want our opinions on, please email us at cinematicoblivion@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at Cinematic Oblivion, and I will be getting a Facebook page up eventually.
Unseen, Island of Blood, Sweet 16.
So you'll have plenty of ways to contact us and see what we're up to. This is kind of a from the grounds up production. We bought all the equipment ourselves. We're running it ourselves. We're promoting it ourselves. So we really appreciate you listening. If you could let your friends know, if you could, subscribe, let people know about it. We're trying to make this work, and we really appreciate you guys listening. So thank you very much for tuning in to the 3-part history of Slasher. We will see you next time. And just from all of us here at Cinematic Oblivion, have a spooky Halloween, folks.
The Outing, Twisted Nightmare, Rush Week, Offerings, Blood Harvest, Strange Behavior, Blood Link, Dark Santa.